Good evening and welcome to tonight's Monroe City Council meeting. This is a regular study session meeting for Tuesday, June 18th, 2024. Time right now is 7 p.m. I ask Clerk Wyckoff to come forward and please call the roll. Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor. Council members present and establishing a quorum are Council members Fulcher, Beaumont, Hanford, Walker, Fisher, and Scarborough.
Thank you. Councilmember Fisher, will you please lead us in the pledge?
Of the United States of America, and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. All right, the first item that we have on the agenda this evening, before we move forward, Councilmember Gamble, do you recall if he had stated he was not going to be here this evening? Okay, unless there's objection, we'll consider his absence as excused. All right, seeing none, although Councilmember Fisher did put his hand up. Just kidding. All right. Okay, that sounds great. All right, seeing no objection, we'll go ahead and move on to the next item on the agenda. That would be public comments under item number 4. Public comment is limited public forum. Spoken public comment is limited to in-person comment only. Written comments can be emailed to the city clerk and must be received by 4 p.m. the day of the meeting for advanced distribution to the city council. Written comments received at the council meeting will be distributed to the council at the council meeting. And pursuant to the council rules of procedure, written comments will not be read into the record. When you come forward, now I'm seeing where the parentheses are. Sorry, my bad. Each person who will be called forward to speak will have up to 3 minutes to speak. We're going to ask that you identify your name and then your association with the city of Monroe or area of residence. And I think that's all that I have for right now. I'm going to go ahead and call on first Yanya.
Yana Telegina.
Thank you very much. Then we'll go ahead and start the timer. Go ahead. Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor Thomas and City Council members for allowing me to speak today. I won't be wasting your time and my 3 minutes by telling you that we're operating since 2016 in the city of Redmond and Seattle, and we're tastefully designed because you already heard that in the last 7 months. Instead, I wanted to highlight some important points based on the study sessions that we recently provided for you to review. And I will start from the city following the state-approved cannabis zoning and the license laws face no federal enforcement threat, and Monroe regional policy in protecting the city from federal interventions has proven unnecessary. Initially, the council implemented the current policies out of the fear of cannabis retail impact. However, the last 6+ years, responsible cannabis retailers have proven not to be a burden on the communities. There is no federal legal risk to state legal programs, and the comprehensive security measures taken by cannabis operators benefits to all retailers around the communities. A University of Washington study found that legalization of the marijuana does not increase violent crime rates. Instead, legalization leads to decline in the violent crime. Another research team found that in Washington, legalization has had little to no effect on the traffic accidents or the fatalities. Cannabis products very heavily regulated by the WSLCB and is about to be federally rescheduled. Monroe is already a shopping hub for people in Snohomish County, and having one of the additional shop at the cannabis retail location would be bring additional tax dollars to our community and many of your projects you're trying to fund. We are asking city councils to revisit its current de facto ban on responsible licensed regulated cannabis operators. Responsible adult consumers in Monroe should not have to be travel 30 minutes to access cannabis. Like just access and pharmacy, residents should be able to find regulated tested products locally and support local businesses and jobs. As you heard from May 14 council meeting, a nonpartisan polling firm found that majority of adult registered voters in Monroe approve of having a limited number of cannabis retail dispensaries. There is a strong desire, support, and demand for the licensed cannabis dispensaries in this community. The sky has not been falling in other communities that allow cannabis dispensaries. It does not decrease property values and does not bring any blight to the community. And in fact, the state mandated security requirements ensure safety of the business employees employees, patrons, and surrounding communities. I will finish my speech with this. You cannot stop the spread of the idea by passing a law against this. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you. Next person who signed up to speak this evening is Sean Miller. Good evening.
Good evening. I'm Sean Miller, owner of Origins, here today to talk about allowing retail cannabis in Monroe. Origins currently has possession of the 2 licenses allocated to the city of Monroe from the Liquor and Cannabis Control Board. I'd like to offer a special thank you to Mayor Thomas and all the council members that have taken the time to speak with our team to better understand the opportunity of retail cannabis in Monroe and of Origins. It's encouraging and validating to see elected officials who care and act upon their constituents and their beliefs. In the current political climate, it's often found that elected officials don't do as they promise or act on their constituents' vote, but rather on their own personal views. So it's good to see that Monroe is not in that situation. I'm a huge fan of Thomas Jefferson, and so as I was thinking about today, I was looking up quotes that I thought were applicable. One was, when a man assumes a public trust, man or woman, I should say, he should be considered himself a public property. I'd like to highlight a couple of points. 2012, legalization of cannabis was on the ballot as I-502. Monroe residents back in 2012 voted affirmative that they wanted legalization and access to cannabis. In 2024, an independent study was done and reaffirmed that 63% of Monroe residents would like to have retail cannabis in Monroe. I'm requesting the removal of the ban of the current retail cannabis that Monroe currently has. I'd also like to point out a couple of the points that we had in the information that we provided to you tonight. One, recreational cannabis does not create more crime, as shown in the studies. Cannabis is not a gateway drug, as shown in the study conducted by the National Institute of Justice. Similar to the Prohibition era, the federal government is now complying with the desires of the public and states and rescheduling cannabis from a Schedule 1 to a Schedule 3, signifying its medical benefits. 4, black market cannabis is dangerous and does not have the safeguards that are built into established licensed facilities. We're all aware that capitalism inherently will fill any and all voids created in market supply and demand. During the Prohibition era, Al Capone famously said, "All I do is supply a public demand. Somebody has to throw some liquor on the thirst." There's a better way to solve this demand. Please remove the ban and allow safe regulated cannabis to be sold in Monroe. My final point is cannabis is here to stay. You have an opportunity in front of you tonight to select a partner that has a very proven track record, a partner who has gone out of their way to help educate and listen to the community, a partner who has chosen to take the high road of collaboration versus disruptive acts that might be more litigious. In the not too distant future, if you choose to uphold your ban, your choice of a partner will no longer be an option. Once expired, the allocation is open to new applicants for Monroe. The LCB has not given a clear indication of when that's going to happen, but they have started to consume the placeholders for either companies that have failed or for social equity.
All right.
Thank you for your time.
Thank you. All right, is there anybody else who wants to speak this evening? Please come forward and state your name and association with the city for the record. Thank you.
Hi, everyone. My name is Susan Davis. I wasn't planning on speaking tonight nor bringing materials, but I did have some. This is the document that I sent you on Friday in your email. And I had the question this evening, is it the same as I had sent before? That's no, the answer is no. I put together information in response to the draft EIS. And so I'm sorry, it's a 13-page document with supplements that reviews land use in Monroe. And I hope that you take some time to read it. I have one copy left here and I'm happy to provide it to whoever wants it. And I can give another copy to whoever else wants it. So I'll be over here. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, is there anybody else that would like to speak to the council this evening? All right, seeing none, we're going to go ahead and move on to the next item on the agenda. That's item number 5, council member reports. And we'll go ahead and start off with Councilmember Hanford. I was going to call you Councilmember Kevin this evening.
Thank you, Mayor. Yes, Saturday, I attended Juneteenth. The last was there for the last few drippings, unfortunately. It was very wet, and but was there with one of my daughters, and So yeah, hopefully better weather next year. Thanks.
Thank you. Councilmember Beaumont?
Thank you, Mayor. I also attended Juneteenth and was there from the beginning. And what a rousing speech the mayor delivered. It was one of his best. And actually, thunder and lightning were clapping above his head as he was speaking. I'm not kidding. It was really something to see. And a lot of people came up and told him how much they enjoyed it. So that was a fine moment for our mayor in our city. And it was a great event, even though it was really, really inclement weather. And that was a shame because it kept a lot of people away. But people that were there enjoyed it. And again, always proud to have these events in our city. Hope everybody comes out to the block party on Saturday from 3 to 7, I think, downtown. So I'll be there. Looking forward to that. And I can't remember if there was anything else I did. So thank you very much.
Thank you. Councilmember Fisher?
Also attended Juneteenth. It was absolutely pouring, unfortunately, but it was still a great place to be. Well organized. It was good to be there. That was about all that I did in this last week. Well, not all. I mean, I did a bunch of things, but as far as like city stuff, that was the only thing. Thank you.
Thank you. Councilmember Scarborough? Thank you. Councilmember Heather? Councilmember Fulcher?
There we go. I was also at Juneteenth, got a chance to try out my water wings and rubber shoes, so that was a lot of fun. And you do have something to report, Councilmember Scarborough. We got to, that's right. Today we went to the food bank and got a tour from Angie. It was great because we didn't get a chance to go to the ribbon cutting. So really appreciate that and everything they do. I know that I'm not the only one up on here who has grocery shopped there a few years. So I'm always grateful for the food bank. And this week, farmer's market on Wednesday. Do not forget. Thanks.
Thank you. Councilmember Walker?
Nothing to report.
Okay, thank you. All right, going to go ahead and move on to the next item on the agenda. That's item number 6, Mayor and Administrator Reports. We'll start off with 6.1, the City Administrator Report Extended Agenda. Administrator Knight.
Great, thank you, Mayor. Good evening, Council. Looking forward then to our next meeting on June 25th. Our P3 committee meeting has been canceled. There's no business to bring to the committee that evening. For the regular business meeting, we will have a presentation by our legislators in the 12th Legislative District. So they'll be giving us a recap of the accomplishments from that last legislative session. Under the consent agenda, then we have the regular items, the accounts payable, meeting minutes, and payroll. We have a mid-year fee resolution update from our finance director, Becky Hassard, a school resource officer, ILA, from Chief Jolly, and then agreement for termination for ILA for system improvements to community access channel. It says night, but it will be Liam McCorkle who will be presenting that evening. We will have under unfinished business an ordinance for the downtown commercial code amendments that has been brought to council at previous meetings. Under discussion items, we have the Monroe 2044 draft utilities chapter with Kate Turtlow, and then department reports. And then the meeting for the 7th of July has been canceled in observance of Independence Day. So I will see you.
Second.
Oh, what did I say?
7th. It's okay.
2nd, thank you.
All right. Any questions about the extended agenda? All right, thank you. And we'll go on to the City Administrator Report.
Great, we already mentioned that the June 25th P3 committee meeting has been canceled. We do have a special meeting that was scheduled for July 30th, and we do have agenda items for that meeting. So the council had previously asked for developers to come back and give some general information about cost to do development in the city of Monroe. And so we are working to bring that information to you. And then we will also have that evening the brand architecture coming back from J. Ray. So we'll have 2 presentations that evening, one from developers and one from J. Ray for the 30th. So if you could mark your calendars, that meeting will go forward. For kudos this evening, I wanted to highlight our contracts division in our Public Works Department. They get audited occasionally for the work that they do in order for the city to maintain its certified agency. And WSDOT came in and audited us for the Chain Lake Road project, and we passed with flying colors. So we get to continue to manage our own projects through the WSDOT process. So we wanted to specifically recognize in that division Kathy Hawkins, Michelle Anderson, who do the contracts work for us, and then Scott Peterson and Matthew Bush, who were the project managers for that project. So Jake is actually out today. He's not feeling well, but he's attending remote, so he can pass that on to his team members. Our thanks and kudos for their work.
Okay. Go ahead. Yep.
Yep, and then final, I had mentioned last week that work is proceeding on the municipal campus, and I do have a couple of picture to share here. So I just wanted, if you haven't had a chance to drive by, you can now see some vertical elements being added. At this point, the underslab utilities have been installed, the concrete floor has been poured, and the steel columns, which are what you're looking at here, have been assembled. So in the coming months, we'll start to see the exterior walls go up, the beams of the roof will be built, and improvements to the parking lot will be complete. And then the plan is to be able then to have the interior work start just as winter begins to hit. So we're at this point, I won't even say it, I'll just knock on wood.
Okay.
I don't
Thank you
want to
very
jinx
much.
us.
No. All right, any questions? Go ahead, Councilmember Hanford.
Thank you, Mayor. Ms. Knight, on the 30th, are we looking at a 5:30?
Yes, we're looking at a
Time?
5:30 start time, and
Okay.
there will be dinner provided to council members.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Any other questions? All right, thank you. We're going to go ahead and move on to, Mayor's report. The Monroe this week is there in the packet. Also attended Juneteenth on Saturday. Everybody already said a lot of rain. I do appreciate the vendors that were there and the people that were there in that very heavy rain. And I swear when I showed up, it was sunny. And I was questioning my choice of clothing, that maybe I should have shown up in a short sleeve shirt. And shortly thereafter, I was thankful that I showed up in a jacket and a hat. So yes, thank you all for everybody who came. And I do appreciate the work that was done by folks to put that on. Thank you. I think that's all that I have to report for right now from the mayor's report. We're going to go ahead and jump right into discussion items under item number 7 tonight. And we are starting off with Monroe 2044, first draft land use chapter with planning manager Turtlev.
Thank you. Before I get started on the comp plan updates, I wanted to share the pizza box that you heard about last week. This is the game board that we took to 4 high school classes and the open house. You can check one out if you'd like to do it with a Sunday school class, an HOA, and after school. It includes a map of the city. You get to play a role, city planner, public works director, environmentalist, and then you have issue cards. You are given 10 tokens for things that you agree with, orange tokens of concern, and at the end, the little diamonds are the magic wand. It's your resources. There's also a note card to summarize what happened and a QR code, so you could send it to our consultants. So if you're interested, we have 12 of them.
And on July 30th, that's where your pizza will be, Kevin.
All right, so with no further ado, I'm going to hop right on in. The 2 chapters that I am introducing tonight, I'm going to begin with our land use chapter. I'm just really going to walk you through what is in your packet. And again, you have a homework assignment. We are requesting that you take a look at the draft documents and provide comments back to me or Jody by June. Oh, these dates are wrong. Oh, no, that's not right. I'm sorry. By June 25th. The same presentation was given to the Planning Commission last week. Their homework assignment is due this coming Friday. So with that, in the land use agenda bill, I just gave you the highlights of how this applies, or how we're applying Imagine Monroe as we're looking at the land use chapter. I've also identified the various goals under the Washington State Growth Management Act, which includes urban growth, reduced sprawl, property rights, natural resource industries, open space. And then I cite also the other plans as we continue to share with you. It's the Growth Management Act, the Puget Sound Regional Council multi-county planning policies and Vision 2050. Then it's the Snohomish County planning policies, and then you finally get to the city of Monroe. So I've identified how we're coming down to the city. I also wanted to highlight that the city of Monroe is in a new we're not in a new geography, but Vision 2050 at the regional level identified a new category called high capacity transit communities. And that is really where all of the investment in light rail and bus rapid transit is occurring. And so there is a desire that the majority of population and employment go to those communities. So Monroe is not expected to grow at the same levels as some of the communities along the 405 and I-5 corridors. I also included the breakout for King, Kitsap, Pierce, and Snohomish counties, and this is just all reference information for you. Continuing on in the agenda bill, again, at the very end, I have identified the population, housing, and employment totals that we are expected to allocate by 2044. And again, like the last elements I brought to you, at this point, we're really looking for high-level feedback. Do you like the tone of the document? Are there things missing that you expected to see in the document? Do you have questions for us? At this point in time, this is just a Word document. It does not include pretty graphics, maps. That will be coming in the next phase. And then it also is set up like the other ones again. Introduction. It also talks about the future land use map, goals and policies. So with that, that was a very quick overview, but do you have any questions for me on this one?
Councilmember Beaumont?
Thank you, Kate. How would you prefer to receive changes, questions, edits?
If it's easiest, I'm happy to send you a Word document. Otherwise, if you want to, I've been accepting everything. Somebody had been sending me PDFs and they had written notes in the columns. I've had some that are handwritten notes on the document that was presented. I can send it to you, whatever is easiest for you. I just appreciate the feedback.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Yeah.
Any other questions from council?
Yeah, if I could hear back from you basically next Friday, June 25th. Yeah.
Any other questions? All right, thank you very much.
Okay, the next one
So
is.
this would be 7.2?
Yes.
Okay, this is the Monroe 2044 final draft environment and shoreline chapter introduction, also with planning manager Tripla.
Jody's telling me the 25th is not a Friday. It's the 25th, whatever date that is. A week. Okay, so it's a week. Yeah. I'll accept comments though. All right, so again, in your packet, the agenda bill really, again, walks through all of the items that we are trying to be compliant with, beginning, of course, with Imagine Monroe. And the very first sentence is a lively center surrounded by nature, a place of beauty and goodwill. Further down in Imagine Monroe, it talks about our parks, waterways, and environment are healthy and accessible for everyone to enjoy. So that is our guiding star. Again, I've included the citations in the Growth Management Act, the Vision 2050, Snohomish County, countywide planning policies. And this one is a little bit different. We are required to do some additional updates that are not being included in this round, and that is a new climate change chapter or inclusion in our natural environment element. It is required by 2029. I will tell you there are some things that we are able to accommodate. The multimodal level of service standards in your transportation chapter, which were introduced a few months ago with our consultant and JACA, that actually will help us get there. There are some bigger items though that we just don't have capacity for. And I will let you know that the state has allocated funding. I just need my staff resources. So I'll be coming to that. And I did want to let you know this was of high concern with the Planning Commission. you will probably hear from them, but they are advocating that that work happens sooner than later. So walking through the chapter, again, it begins with an introduction. This one has some additional attachments included. So it's the introduction, relationship to the other plans I've already mentioned, talks about the environmental characteristics, which is identical to our last two comprehensive plans. That's the one that's got the maps for soils, the water basins, has a lot of pretty maps in it already. Then there's just a few teasers in there about the climate change and the work to come. And then again, it includes all the goals and policies. This one has additional attachments, as I just mentioned, some of the things that we already do that will help us meet some of these new requirements is we do participate with Snohomish County on the hazards mitigation plan. That's updated every 5 years, and that is one of the attachments in the document. I also included, ESA, which is one of our consultants working on this. They had done a water plan assessment, and there's also a very preliminary climate change analysis, which is looking at the things that would impact Monroe the most. That is the potential for hotter summers, more intense storms, potential flooding. And that is also a very brief overview of this chapter. The deadline is also June 25th, 1 week from today.
Questions? All right, thank you very much.
All right, thank you.
All right, the next item we have on the agenda is item 7.3, levy lid lift discussion with Director Hassert.
Figured they're here. I brought reinforcements.
So thank you, Mr. Mayor, Council. So we've been in front of the council a couple of times now talking about the various potential revenues that are available to you as we start thinking about the next biennium budget. Very, very preliminary as we're looking at, and you saw it in the last finance report, you'll see it again in the upcoming finance report next week. One of our largest revenue sources for the general fund, the sales taxes, is staying pretty stagnant. And so we don't expect a lot of growth in that over the next couple of years. We're not seeing too much backwards, but usually there's growth associated with that, and we're not anticipating that. So that's part of why we want to keep having these discussions about revenue. After last week's presentation, or was it last week? It was last week. While there wasn't a clear consensus from council on which one to pursue, we thought we would hone in on the levy lid lift itself because that seems to be the one that makes the most sense. It would be a general fund revenue. It is an ongoing revenue. And the items that we're talking about suggesting using it to support did come out of the strategic plan discussion. And it specifically circulated around additional help in the Parks Department, especially for operations and maintenance, as we've been bringing on a lot more park or activating a lot more parkland over the last few years. And also to be able to convert the temporary community services officer in the police department into a permanent position. Both strategies would need ongoing revenue. And so by going out and asking for a levy lid lift, we get to hear from the community who also seems to say that these are their priorities whenever we do surveys. Are they willing to help fund it? So with that, I wasn't going to necessarily tonight go into the specifics again on a levy lid lift unless there were specific questions about it. I did, however, print out for you. This was the table that was supposed to be in the agenda bill that references the table below. And then for some reason, when it got published, it dropped the table. So I did make copies, and that's what's on your dais in front of you. And what you have, what that is national benchmarks, both through the National Recreation and Parks Association, as well as the International City Managers Association, on what is a good benchmark for the number of acres that every parks FTE should be maintaining. And as you can see, best practice through ICMA is 12 acres per maintenance M&O maintenance worker. We are currently at over 26 acres per maintenance worker. So there is definitely a deficit here on the need. We're concerned about starting to burn out the employees, and this is why I brought backup, because they can speak, both Mr. Swanson and Mr. Farrell can speak to the need much better and much more eloquently than I can. But that's part of the driving force of this. We also have Deputy Chief Ryan Irving in the audience too, if you guys have questions about the CSO program. So I just thought I'd be nice to him and not make him come up to the table.
Okay, before we hear from park staff, are there any questions right now? All right.
Thank you. Good evening, Mayor, Council. Yeah, I'll follow up with a little bit on the parks as far as our needs. I know I've spoken, I believe, with each and every one of you in the past about the fact that really it's about maintenance of our parks. I mean, we have wonderful parks. We have a lot of acres. We have 288 acres. We recently, a couple of years ago, updated our pros plan, and that's really the main point, as far as coming away from the plan, aside from, the desires of the community to add more parks and develop more parks and renovate parks, is the maintenance needs, the deferred maintenance. We have the vast majority of our parks were built around the early 1990s, and they're reaching, points where some of that deferred maintenance now is costing more due to just not being able to keep up with things. We've done a great job of prioritizing and reprioritizing and really literally doing the more with less. I know that's a saying that gets used a lot, but we honestly can really say that. Really proud of our folks out in the parks, and we all know it, and I know our community is aware of that as well. Another element or aspect of the pros plan was we got a lot of community input, and through surveys and whatnot, and that was, people love our parks and they love what our staff does. I jotted some notes, so to just give a little bit of a like you say, a context of really what our need is, and it's about maintenance workers, the folks that are out there maintaining our parks. So as I had mentioned, is like we've been doing more with less, and that's really unsustainable. As we have grand plans to, we're finishing up a trails plan later this year. We're going to have priority projects about adding new trails and renovating trails. We're aware of the playgrounds. We have a new parkland in the north end of town that we have yet to develop, and then we have other things like the cabin property as well. So the needing more maintenance and operations resources is really critical. So the deferred maintenance needs, I mentioned earlier, many of our parks were built in the 90s, and so in recent years, a lot of these kind of long-term maintenance obligations have been surfacing, and with our staff, and we've also had wonderful increases in the amount of special events and activities in our parks, and we've talked about music concerts, and we have the wakeboard coming back, we have triathlons, and all sorts of things. They require a lot of event support operations, work and time and labor. But getting into the deferred maintenance, just some examples of what does that mean. The improvements such as like painting, sealing buildings, paths like cracks and facilities, pruning, replacing trees, when there's stumps, irrigation repairs of parts of sections are shut down, pressure washing, turf care, the aeration, overseeding, and fertilizing, which are they're time consuming tasks. They reduce weeds in the grass. They make it safer for kids that are playing in the parks and adults as well. So that's critical. So it's not just about mowing the grass. It's about caring for the the health of the grass and whatnot. Replacing toilets, sinks, and dryers and partitions, and drinking fountains. The asset management, it's just we've been getting a little bit behind with things. And what we've been doing in the meantime, and that's again, that's a really testament to our staff, is we've been focusing on clean parks and safe playgrounds and sports fields, and event support, as I mentioned. But then the other tasks, they have to take a lower priority, and so we're just seeing a lot of that. So and another priority that comes up a lot is that would be ahead of these deferred maintenance examples that I've mentioned is like vandalism. We have no control over that, but when it hits, we've got to make the repairs and clean it up. It's a high priority, and also when we have weather events such as flooding and whatnot. So that's really kind of the situation, and so that's really what we're asking for is the opportunity with new option on revenue to address some of that. And with that, I don't know if Ben wants to add anything. I think you had a few examples of just to give you some context of like some of these tasks as far as how many hours does it take, and when they're mentioned, you kind of get a little bit of sense of that. We have 6 people. Go ahead, Councilmember.
Just a second. Did you have anything else? I don't. Okay, Councilmember, go ahead.
Okay, so according to the figures, we got 26.2 acres per FTE, and you're saying it should be 1 per 12 acres. So you're under half staffed?
Well, what we show you there is actually a range. So that 12 would be what says a best practice from the ICMA, the International City Managers Association, but the general standard would be 18 to 20 acres per FTE. And again, we're at 26.2, and then the NRPA, the median was 17, and that was in 2013, and in 2016, a few years later, it actually dropped to 13 acres per. So yeah.
So you're basically requesting at least 1 FTE.
Yeah, and so go ahead.
Actually, the ideal would be, and it still wouldn't get them up to ideal full staffing, is requesting 4 FTEs. That's why the need for the levy lid left. So once Mr. Swanson and Mr. Farrell are done explaining the need, I'll get back to why we're talking about it to this depth tonight instead of during the usual budget process. And that's when we'll get into figures a little bit more.
Okay, thank you.
Any more questions so far in the presentation? Go ahead, Councilmember Beaumont.
So I did take a look at this, and you're asking for basically, it's 150,000 per year for salary and benefits. That's for each full-time employee for parks. So what would these positions be? It's O&M. So it's what would give me an example of a position and what that salary might be. That seems like a lot. And I think the voters might look at that and say, wow, that's a lot for someone who's working in our Parks Department. So if you could elaborate on that, I'd really appreciate it.
Yeah. Oh, I can start, and maybe Becky could add with the benefits side of it as far as the costs. But those are maintenance workers for FTEs, full-time maintenance worker twos.
And what would an average salary be for just ballpark?
I don't have that figure off the top of my head. I'd have to go back to it. We always want to be conservative. The idea is not just the salary and benefits, but also the materials and the equipment that go with each of those positions. And it's equipment that we go through pretty quickly. So you're talking mowers, and quite frankly, mowers for a city, when you buy a grasshopper mower, they're not the cheapest piece of equipment out there. It's almost treated like a rolling stock in the fleet. So we wanted to use a number that was a little bit more round. Benefits tend to run about 35 to 40% of salary, and salaries have been going up the last few years because of inflation. We're tied to the CPI. for the Seattle, Tacoma, Bellevue area. And so when we were looking at, depending on where they would come in on the scale, what kind of experience they have, you're not talking starting wages here for these positions. So.
Okay. I also noticed there's, after initial $50,000 per employee for a vehicle. And then it says, after initial purchase of the vehicles in parks, the vehicle costs would go toward the supplies and materials used for parks maintenance in our system. What would that be? What kinds of things would that be? That's an additional $50,000.
Yeah, so like, as I kind of had mentioned earlier, with the various tasks, like they could be mulch, it could be rock, it could be, just basically supplies, fertilizer, herbicides, those sorts of things. Because if we have people and then we didn't increase the supplies, then what are we gonna do, with those people? And then, and digging a little bit more with that is, I'd say like generally it's about like 70 grand or something like that, plus benefits roughly. Because there's like a range, and then by example, we're starting our seasonals at, I think, is it $23 an hour is what we're starting our seasonals at, part-time seasonals.
Gotcha.
So
Okay.
that kind of gets to what Becky was mentioning about just the cost of
Right.
doing business.
I do think voters will want to, my thought was, what will the voters think of this? Well, and those
Yeah,
are
that'd be
questions I
part-
think
That's great for information.
Absolutely.
Yeah, to have.
I did have a question, and, I was on Parks Board for 8 years, so
Yeah.
I understand all of this. But are we currently understaffed compared to what we were before the pandemic? Have we been operating at a deficit, staff-wise?
I would say it's farther back than that. So
Okay.
From 2008.
Okay.
So.
So that's
as far
another
as
point we could
less
make,
staff.
is that
Correct.
we are way
Yes.
under what just thinking in terms of
Yeah.
voter questions and what people might be asking.
Yes, that's stated in the pros plan as well.
Great. Thank you.
Any other questions before we return to the Mr. Swanson and Director Farrell? Go ahead.
Thank you guys for your presentation so far. Just wanted to ask a clarifying question. Do I recall that we had 8 parks maintenance workers in 2008 or before that time? I thought I heard that figure a while back. I'll change the question. We have less maintenance workers now than we did in 2008 or before 2008?
Yes, yeah. Yes. 8 in 2008, we currently have 6.
Thank you.
And the system is grown.
And the what?
And the park system is grown,
As a
which but I'm just saying it out loud.
crazy.
So I'm going to go ahead and return to the two of you to complete your presentation. Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead, Councilmember Hanford.
He's raising it for me.
Councilmember Fisher on behalf of, anyway, either way, go ahead.
I was wondering if we could go over TBD, the 0.1% sales tax again. I know we were talking about the levy lid lift for funds, and maybe just kind of go over that again and what that can actually be used for, what that money is allocated for.
Okay.
I'm sorry, did you miss that?
Sorry,
It was
I
kind of,
was
no, it's
answering a
totally okay.
question.
Wondering if we can go over the TBD increase in sales tax, the 0.1%. Again, just as another revenue stream for this and how that money can be allocated towards parks, or if it's just for transportation.
That is restricted by statute to just be for your transportation system.
Okay.
Yeah, it cannot be used for parks.
Perfect, thank you.
Any other questions? All right. What? Yeah. All right. I'm going to return back to park staff.
Yeah, I was just, before I pass on to Ben, to answer Councilmember Scarborough's inquiry, is that, 1 to 4 FTEs. Our deficit is 4 FTEs, and that's stated in the pros plan, and basically in our analysis of, like, with the acres that we have, the facilities, the events, especially, Ben did a deeper dive into that. 4 we would basically address that and be caught up in a sense. So anything kind of short of that's going to help. So that's why I first answered. You said 1, I said sure, but 4 would ultimately catch us up.
Yeah, so along with what everybody else said, is you'll see a lot of impact within our existing footprint of our parks too. I had our park supervisor, Mike Thomas, pull some numbers. And so far, just field prep this year, we're looking at 289 hours of just field prep time by staff. And what this is actually this pretty remarkable increase of teams using our field specifically during this time of year. So 2015, we had 10 teams requesting reservations. 2021, we went up to 23. And 2022, we went up to 53. And so it's great. People love the parks, but all those have an associated responsibility from staff that go along with it. And so specifically just lining the fields out from game to game. Same with special events. We've seen a significant increase in special events over the years. Behind just about every special event, there's a park staff person there. And so just when you start adding all these numbers up together, I was looking at, we recently about 4 or 5 years ago started tracking, more so tracking our data, and just the medians within the right of way is almost an FTE. And so that person isn't even in a park. They are maintaining a right of way. And then you look at special events, and that's a little over 0.25 of an FTE. Again, not maintaining a park, but attending a special event, taking out trash and those kind of things. And so that's what we just started doing, the field prep stuff this year. So I'm going to try to extrapolate those numbers out. But again, they're setting up games, those kind of things, not mowing lawns, not aerating, not doing any of that stuff. And that's where we're seeing this kind of give and take thing, and they keep, kind of scooching their time a little bit here as things start deteriorating. And then also we had just the timing of Monroe, where you saw the Frylands and everything all got built at the same, just about the same time. And so all of that stuff is coming due at the same time. And so you have these more frequent instances of having to do some deferred maintenance, break from this and go over and fix this up. And that's one of the things that we had talked about internally is with this levy lid lift is if we could get a person that specializes in facilities, and that's where we'd like some of that flex in the pay. And so they are the bathroom person. They're the one going and dealing with this stuff because they're out there running a lawnmower. Okay, a toilet's broken. Now I got to jump off my lawnmower. I got to go figure out how to fix this toilet and jump back on my lawnmower. If we had someone that could go around and just be dedicated to facilities and going around and maintaining those things, because it's repetition, it's efficiency that comes through those things. When graffiti goes up, you have that person up there to, Johnny on the spot, just cover those kind of things up. And so I think there's a lot of room to kind of, flex our program around a little bit to get a better bang for our buck, I guess, out of our employees.
Anything else?
I would just add that, the point Ben made can't be overstated, is that, so out of those 6 FTEs equivalents, it's about hours, what do we have the hours to do? So there's one of the FTEs isn't even working in the parks, they're working in the streets, so.
Anything else from staff? Yes. Okay, I'll turn to questions. Councilmember Scarborough, go ahead.
Okay, all these hours that you said that we've had requests for people to use the fields, what percentage of your deficit do we recoup from these people using the fields? Renting, paying a fee?
It's about 60.
I'm not quite sure if it's quite that high, but.
Yeah, I think it's right around $50,000 or $60,000 a year. It's lower. It's a sweet spot, right? You don't want to charge so much that it gets people. But sorry.
That's all right, I can hear.
I think it was about 2 years ago we brought this up where we actually increased our field rates to be kind of more on par. Too low, then everybody comes in from outside the area because once you use your field because they're so cheap. And so we're at a pretty good spot, but unfortunately it doesn't. It goes back into paying for employees, but doesn't cover the full cost.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, I'll just add to that, there's like kind of there's the equity factor as far as how much do we subsidize, for our community, use of the field. So yes, there is a percentage of revenues we collect.
And I would also add that we also want to be careful we don't go too high, because there's also the ripple effect. If we've got tournaments coming in from outside the area, then that's more people coming into town, maybe going to dinner or having lunch here, spending their money here. Maybe if it's a multi-day tournament, staying in our hotels. So there's an economic development factor to this too, with having very, very nice parks and becoming a destination for sports. I mean, you heard some of that last week too, so.
Thank you. Councilmember Fulcher, and then Councilmember Hanford, and then Councilmember Walker. Go ahead, Councilmember Fulcher.
Thanks. All right, I do appreciate this discussion for education's sake, because I think we all need to be very aware of what our Parks Department has been working with and working without. My concern is, here we are talking about a levy lid lift, and you just said, Becky, that there's a ripple effect from this tournament people coming in. So why are the homeowners the ones that are paying for this? Because to me, it's pretty obvious who's using the park, and that would be the people who are coming in from out of town. It is us as well, but we are already paying. I think you need to capture the money from the source that is the users of it. So as much as I like this education about levy lid lift, and I always like learning something, but I am not sold on this. I think that it needs to be a sales tax when we talk about this, because that really gets us to who is using the park, who is putting more on there.
Thank you. Anything?
I wasn't done, but looks like Deborah has something.
Oh,
Okay. Yep, and so when we talked also about the cost for each employee, wouldn't it be awesome if someone who worked at City of Monroe had a living wage job? So I'm not quibbling about the price on that. I think that was good that you brought that up, though, so we can be fully educated about that too. I know I'll have more, but that's it for now.
okay. Thank you. Staff?
I wanted to address the comment about a sales tax option for parks, because it's something that I too am passionate about. It's something that I experienced with the other cities that I've worked for, both the city of Sultan and the city of Stanwood. Like Monroe, those cities are kind of hubs for the region. And one of the things that Director Farrell and I worked on for a number of years was trying to work with our state legislators to give cities the option for a sales tax for parks, similar to the transportation benefit district. So you could charge a sales tax, because it is folks that are coming from outside the city, oftentimes the county folks, right, that we can't tax, but who are using our facilities. And the only way to do that is through the current process that we have, which is charging a different rate for field use, right, for residents versus non-residents. And Mr. Farrell and I worked for 3 years with the Washington Park and Rec Association to try and get a sales tax option through the state legislature. And unfortunately, that option didn't resonate with members of the state legislature. They just felt like it was another tax. And so we got it through the House, I think, once into the Senate as far as Ways and Means, but we couldn't get it pulled onto the floor. So I think it is something that maybe we want to continue to pursue when the opportunity is right. But I don't think that now would be the time to try and take it back to the state legislature. I think we have to wait again for maybe the stars to come into alignment for the state legislature to feel like parks are an important topic that they're focusing in on, because right now I think the main focus for the state legislature is housing, right, and housing affordability. That seems to be kind of their main focus. But we can certainly, again, make it a priority for the city of Monroe and try and bring it back through our legislative priorities list. But unfortunately, at this time, the only tool that we have in the toolbox for bringing in additional revenue to the city in order to take care of these types of general fund expenses is at levy lid lift. I mean, it was the purpose for bringing back kind of the list of revenue options for council to consider, was to say, you know, here are a number of choices that you have as a body. And we talked about a number of them. We talked about, for example, there's stormwater utility tax. That's something that we could initiate. That money could come back to the general fund. We do have banked capacity, but that money is only sufficient to fund one position in all of the general fund. So just one position in all of the general fund. The other options that we have are, I'm trying to think what were the others that we considered.
Well, the horrible, no good, very bad one is B&O tax.
We won't, no.
Sorry, not that I'm sharing my feelings
We-
about that one.
I'll share my
We're gonna
feelings.
We're gonna be
No.
talking later this evening about speed zone cameras, but that revenue is limited to public safety. We are going to be talking about retail cannabis. That revenue will bring in, we're estimating about $50,000. So again, not enough to cover the type of deficit that we're currently experiencing in our Parks Department. And so when we're kind of looking across the landscape of, we have a deficit currently, and we're not going to have, as Ms. Hassard mentioned, an increase in sales tax revenue, which could, again, if we had that, fund additional positions. But that revenue is now very flat and expected to be flat for the next 2 years. And so the options that I think are really in front of the council at this point are, either consider, a voter approved levy. So you're putting it out to voters and saying, hey, we can tell a compelling story about why we think that this is an important opportunity to fund our Parks Department. Or I think we're going to be truthfully off for a couple of years before we can circle back around again. And at that point, I don't know what the economy might be like. So this seems kind of like the right timing to take something to the voters and say, you have expressed to us that you really value our parks and that parks are something that make Monroe special. But we can't continue with our current staffing levels to maintain the parks like we've done in the past. We're kind of reached that breaking point. So we might be able to fill in a couple of gaps with existing revenue options that we have. But if you want to make an investment in your parks that is going to last for the next 10 to 15 years, this levy lid lift, I'm thinking, is probably our best option at this point. And that's the reason why we're bringing it to you. Ultimately, of course, it's the council's decision to make, but we wanted to make sure that you're making an informed decision.
Councilmember Fulcher, anything else? Okay, is there anything else from staff before I move on to the next person? All right, Councilmember Hanford, you're next.
Thank you, Mayor. Well, the first thing I have to say is I really appreciate the Parks Department, and I want to express a huge thank you to you and your team. I told you this many times, Mike, but when I walk the lake almost daily, it's just fabulous. And yeah, did you like that? And seriously, it's just beautiful, and your team has done an amazing job with 26 acres per FTE. That's crazy. So just a few questions, and I appreciate Ms. Knight, the update and clarifications that you just gave. Just clarifying, so if we were to pursue the TBD sales tax increase of 0.1%, that money has to go to transportation. However, are there other funding sources that we're using to fund transportation so we could rob Peter to pay Paul, if that makes sense?
We call that supplanting.
Supplanting, and the answer is no. And that was spelled out in the memo that was attached to the agenda bills the last 2 times.
Okay.
We use real estate excise taxes to help with transportation capital. And again, that has to be spent on capital, so you can't use that for O&M. And then gas taxes that come from the state are also restricted by statute, has to be used for the transportation system. So they're really, even if the council were to enact that 0.1% councilmatic on sales taxes, there would be no opportunity to be able to supplant with that.
Okay, thank you. My next question is, when was the last time that we raised the taxes for the field use? Or the costs for the field use? Okay. And are we tracking, do we know how much of the field use is coming from outside the city?
We have that, we would have that information.
Okay. Yeah, I agree with everything that's been said. Like, the challenge is that so many people come from outside of our city limits to use the parks. And it'd be nice, to be able to have them pay their fair share, which is going back to what Ms. Knight said when we put it on the voters ballot for the parks for this area, and it was close, wasn't it?
When we put a bond measure
Yeah.
on the ballot, it actually passed in the city of Monroe, but we were working with our partners in the Metropolitan Park District, and it did not pass outside the county. So within the city, it passed. It was the county residents that chose not to vote in favor of it, in part because they were voting for Maltby Park, as
Right.
opposed to city residents voting for city parks. In hindsight, we probably should have just gone out on our own, and then we would have had bond money, but that's for capital projects, not for operations. and
Sure.
maintenance, which is what we're wanting to talk about supporting this.
Yeah. As far as the bank capacity, with the additional cost of about $15 a year for homeowners, average homeowner, I realize that's only one position, but I'm not, and if you look at my track record, I've never really been in favor of raising taxes over the years. In fact, that was one of my questions. When was the last time that we raised the taxes? I feel like I saw it last week, but I can't remember.
So the council did choose to use bank capacity in this current biennium to help with some human services programs. You have used them 3 different times since I've been here with the city. I think part of it is that it's always been tied to a specific program. So people know what they're buying with it.
Correct. So that being said, I personally am fine with that, using that bank capacity, because that's one position of the 5 that we're looking at. The other thing is, I was going to ask Mr. Farrell, when you say 4 workers are enough, like, is that just barely enough? Or because we're here considering all this now, and so like now's the time to say, like, we really need 5, but we could make do with 4 barely. We've been making do for years. So
Thank you. Yeah, to answer your question, 4 would catch us up to where we should be currently. So, but then, moving forward, with new developments of parks, again, we have Trombley Park, that's an undeveloped parkland. We'll have Cadman coming down the road. There will be future needs, to fill, the maintenance, the M&O basically for the new parklands. And, and that would be, I guess, at that point in time, because, being responsible with, taxpayer dollars, I think that, just addressing what we have now is really our critical need.
Today, when I was walking around the lake, I specifically noticed, it's weird that you mentioned that. I noticed a bunch of weeds on both sides of the path that just interspersed in the grass, the kind that are kind of prickly and not friendly to, human or dog feet. And I thought, man, I wish we could get that taken care of. And then now you're talking about it tonight. It's just ironic. I just thought that would be worth bringing up.
We knew you were going on a walk.
Yes.
You can pull those weeds.
Oh, my goodness. Yeah. My thoughts are the 1084 a month for the levy lift is probably something that most people would agree with and be okay with. But I also am wondering, my other question is, what's the cost to add this levy lift to the election in November?
So that we don't know yet. It probably would be minimal because we're already going to have a cost share for the November election since it's a national election. And you also have a lot of major statewide offices there as well. That's part of why it's the least expensive option as far as the vote goes, because we're sharing that cost throughout the county versus trying to run our own in the spring. And that's what I was going to follow up with, is why we're talking about this tonight and potential timing. And part of that is to take advantage of being able to run an election as cost efficiently as possible. And that would be to do it in November. And in order to do that in November, we'd have to have the ballot measure, the ballot resolution to the county before August 6th.
Thank you. Yeah, and I remember from the past that that's been something that we've considered, is the cost when we want to talk about putting something on the levy or on the ballot. Is it even worth that extra cost? And because it's a national election, to me, that makes sense. But I'm looking forward to hearing from other council members. Thank you.
Thank you. Councilmember Walker?
Not known to talk a lot, but I want to give a long piece on this. So the other day, after a ribbon cutting for the Kiwanis-backed sensory boards, I want to say they were called, I had this perfect opportunity to go on a walk with Mr. Swanson. And I wish that the entire council was there with me, because it was just a fascinating opportunity to be able to walk around it was Lake Tide Park, and just say, Ben, what does a piece of equipment like that cost on the park? There's certain pieces there that get broken all the time. So it was fascinating to hear that the expenses of some of these things, like $5,000 for repairs that have been completed multiple times. And Ben, what budget did you say that expenses like that come out of, repairs?
Sometimes they come out of cap, depending on the cost, sometimes capital, but a lot of it comes just out of our supplies budget.
Okay. Yeah, it was really interesting. So we walked the lake. During the walk, there was a gentleman on the tractor. He was mowing, and I was asking Ben about how long he's been with Monroe. And he actually said he's actually in a management capacity, but when we're short-staffed, he'll hop on the mower and come out and join the guys. And that was pretty wild to me, to combine with the testimonial that I've heard before, that we have less maintenance workers than we do before the recession, is just still crazy to me. I was just looking it up. We had 420 acres of parks and open space in 2008. You guys have an idea on the number today? I should, yeah.
I think that number.
Don't worry about it.
Yeah,
Don't worry about
a
it.
lower number than that.
I was gonna say, I'd assume it's,
But it's grown, but at least by more than the third, I'd say, from what we had. And then also, to a degree, we had acres, or acreage, let's say, in 2008, but like a portion of the acreage was like either low or undeveloped sort of parklands. And so what we've been doing through the years is we've been utilizing more, like say, Wiggly Field was just an area that was not utilized, and now we have Wiggly Field there as one example. So we've been, the total acres have grown, but also within the acres that we have more developed areas as well. They have a skate park, it's more complex. The artificial turf fields, that's a more complex, maintenance and operations requirements than what was there before.
awesome.
Correct, yeah, and I was actually working on those numbers early this morning, and I want to say it's around active use, 50-acre difference in that, and just as Mike said, some of that area back in the 2000s wasn't counted because it wasn't active, where the skate park is now, and those kind of things. So this is stretching back about 20 years from, I think it was a 2008 pros plan, which is that was the first pros plan, right? Was it, or it was the second one? Okay. And so anyway, the last document I could find on the server. And so yeah, you had those kind of increases going on, and as far as expanding these different footprints to create more active use. And so that's just been going on over time. Kind of newer things that we picked up is the festival lot, which, does have landscaping, requires litter to be picked up. It's all these little things, Trombley Hill Park, we're trying to get that mowed down so the residents can, at least get out there, and they enjoy it, getting out there and taking their dogs out there, but we're not able to do it at a frequency we would like to keep that grass down.
all that, when you explain all those different points around town as well, it gets even crazier. I've asked some friends and family this, how many people do you think maintain all of our parks and open spaces? And most people say 12 to 15. So it kind of puts in perspective how wild those figures are. When you think about the medians, I went by the North Hill Park the other day and it looked tight. It was mowed nice. Lake Tide Park's always looking nice. All the events are always executed perfectly by parks. And it kind of made me realize that it seems like every business has that one employee that does 80% of the work, but it may not go noticed. And so they're not given the proper kind of appreciation or attention. And I think that that's kind of what may be occurring with parks. They might be a victim of their own success, and that our parks look so good and are so well maintained that I think a lot of us just go, oh, they got enough. But when you think about some of those figures, I mean, what happens if we lose 3 workers all of a sudden and you've got parks that have grass that are feet tall and we can't get people to staff events? I was also looking up survey results, and it's something that we all know, but when you ask Monroe residents what's the most important to you, parks is always number one by a lot. Public safety is right there with it. But parks are one of the main focus of people in deciding where they want to live. And so I think we've got a responsibility to make sure that we're properly investing in that. Because what it seems like in listening to these issues with deferred maintenance on all these things, it reminds me of not putting oil in your car or not maintaining your car well enough. I mean, if you think about it, these are really just deferred capital expenses that we're going to have down the line, because for now we've got enough people to make the grass look good. And I think that the timing of it is right, because if you think about it, we've got so many other things coming down the pipe, whether it's the police facility, if we did want to do some kind of parks bond down the line, if we wanted to do something, I guess a bond for the North Hill area. I was reading something that gas tax revenues continue to go down. So you have a question about public works in the future. You've also got other regional groups or the school board that might run bonds in the next 2 years. So you've got to be thinking about all these competing priorities. And for $11 a month, I think that we'd be surprised how many residents would probably support that. For me, the capital maintenance alone is something that we should have been doing a while back, and I think we're going to have to pay the piper for it at some point, because I think we may have been overinvesting in capital pieces instead. And I would beat the drum on this all day long. I am in full support of the levy lift sooner than later. I think the sooner we run it, the better odds we have of getting support for it. I'll write the affirmative for it. I don't know if a council member is allowed to do that. But I appreciate your guys so much. I was out on a walk on, I want to say Sunday, and there was 3 parks maintenance workers out there, which I don't even know how that's done. They're working 7 days a week. And I'd be blown away to imagine our parks look as good as they do now. What would it look like if they were getting proper maintenance? The stumps were removed. I am scared about the 3 feet tall grass that could hit us one day, and we're going to have to answer for that as a council. So anyways.
Thank you, Councilmember Walker. Councilmember Beaumont.
Thank you, Mayor, and thank you for the presentation. So that $10 or $11 a month might really be hard for some people. So since 2018, RCW allows cities to exempt senior citizens, disabled veterans, and the disabled from levy lifts. What age is considered a senior citizen in our city?
I don't know that off the top of my head, but we'd have to find out. But that is something that we would definitely want to include in the levy lift.
Thank you.
Thank you. Councilmember Scarborough.
Couple things. You mentioned that you saw somebody from admin getting on or from the administration, getting on a lawnmower to work. Although admirable, it's great, but do you not put yourself in peril with the union when you do that? Having worked at the school district, I know the answer, you tell me the answer.
Yeah, that's correct, but.
So another
Yeah, it was-
reason to spend the money to fix the problem.
Yeah, to clarify though, that they were both union,
Okay.
as a supervisor, not a manager, but,
Okay.
yeah. But yeah, that's a concern is that, you know,
Yeah.
just the shortage of hours.
Okay, and when we look at this $800,000 figure for FTEs, and we say that it takes, say you hired 4 people, it would be wages, benefits, and $50,000 in equipment. Would it be realistic to think that the $50,000 in equipment would be something that would only be needed like every 5 years? You know, instead, and then to adjust our needs with our figures to that thought process?
So one of the things, and actually, once the meat and potatoes of the presentation was done, I was going to go back to the figures. Even between when we first presented this to the finance committee and then writing this particular agenda bill for tonight, the numbers have been honed down, and they will continue to get honed down.
Okay.
How deep we wanted to go into the weeds of the numbers was going to depend on the timing of what council was willing to go with. Because obviously the numbers are going to change if we don't run this election until next year, because we'll have CPI, you know, the economy changes, price of equipment changes, et cetera. The first year, the anticipation is to purchase vehicles for the positions. After that, because we're starting to run into this already with the parks budget, is that they're straining at the seams just for their everyday supplies. You know, they talk about the fertilizer and the mulch, just being able to pay for that. Last thing you want is to have staff sitting around and then they have nothing to work with. So while the first year would be like the vehicles, then there's the payment, the depreciation for replacement of vehicles, depending on the life cycle. Most of the time for the maintenance trucks like that, they're more in the 7 to 10 year range. So there'd be a little bit then that's paid into fleet, because it will increase the fleet costs to the parks portion of the general fund by adding the 5 new vehicles. But then the rest of the money then would be used for the supplies for them to have to be able to go out and do the maintenance that we're talking about that isn't getting done now.
So are your vehicles on a reimbursement schedule like a school bus from the
Yes.
state? Okay, I don't need to know about it, I just know that it is. Okay, and if we allocate all this money to this problem, where does that put us when we're talking about building a new police department? Where is it? Is this going to jeopardize the money we're trying to find for a police department, or what?
Yeah, it's bond versus levy timing.
Okay.
It's what the voters prioritize. It's hard to say.
Okay, that's all I have. Thank
All
you.
right, thank you. Councilmember Fisher and then Councilmember Walker.
Hey, I struggle with these microphones. First of all, I want to know what it takes to get to go on a walk with Ben. Number one, I've been trying to do that for years. I was on planning commission. He was there. Not a single walk. I don't think it's me. As much as it, oh my gosh. As much as it pains me to be in support of raising cost of living for people, I am in support for the levy lift. I think, obviously, as everybody has said, how important our parks are. One thing that hasn't been said is I think it's vitally important for quality of life within our city. We talk about housing and quality of life. We talk about other things in quality of life. And I think parks has a really big part of quality of life within our city. Outdoor space, place to talk with people, to gather with people, to have events and have functions. I think it's incredibly important. So not nearly as long-winded as my co-partner here.
There's a lot more wind left.
I mean, I can keep going and talking about getting a walk with Ben, but I will not. So that's where I'm at. Thank you.
Thank you. Councilmember Walker?
I was thinking about the property tax item, and I realized that, number one, I think we've been getting a discount on our parks maintenance, or the taxes, the revenue that maybe we should have been spending, or homeowners may have been spending since 2008 or whenever the last time it was raised. But also, parks are a huge part of your property valuation, your home's market value as well. I mean, there's entire sections about it on your Redfin profile. I just completely agree with Councilmember Fisher's point. It's a huge point of community pride as well. Wouldn't you like to have clean public restrooms in the bathrooms every time someone has to take their 5-year-old in there to wash their hands? My son dropped his toy on the ground in the Lake Tide bathroom the other day, and while I know Parks staff members do a great job, maintenance, I wish that we had more guys, or more employees, sorry, cleaning.
I thought you were going to say more toys to replace
that too. That too. But sorry, I wanted to respond to Councilmember Scarborough's point about timing. If all of these things keep building up, we're going to get none of them, because how about if the ports
Port District
levy?
Yeah, the
Levy.
annexation.
Yeah, so if their annexation goes through in August, and then we have a bond for the police facility that we want to run, say next year or 2 years from now, and then you have the school district gets one, the hospital district may go out for one. So we can keep pushing this out, but instead of just fatiguing our voters and our residents with a ton of taxes at once, I'd love to see the math, but I doubt it's as much as inflation. Lastly, I would say in the fall, residents the most common thing I was asked is about parks. This is like one of the top issues for elections as well. So it's very, very risky for us as elected officials to run the gamut of potentially neglecting our parks, because we didn't want to pay for it at this time. Again, you got to get your oil changed. Sorry, that's all I got.
Thank you. Councilmember Fulcher?
This is my second time, so does that mean we've gone around twice now? Everyone, okay. All right, so running a business myself, I do understand that as I add more employees, I need to add more stuff that goes with them. They can't just keep sharing all the same equipment. So I totally get the expenditures that we're looking at. It's more than just the cost of more people, which are very much needed, by the way. I'm fully in support of that. I do think we need to raise the prices on the rentals. I mean, you just mentioned that, that going around in a year, things are going to cost more, right? Well, everything, it costs more. And sorry, specialized teams, you need to pay a little more. We still have an amazing field, and I think they'll still pay the bump. And also in this national economy where we are all, I don't know about you, but I'm shopping used more than I used to. And so I can see why the sales tax thing, even though that's my dream answer, is not the answer. But when it all comes down to it, even if I'm dressing from Goodwill all the time, at least I can wear my Goodwill clothes to the park where it's always pretty and go on a walk, because that's free with Ben. Yeah. So anyway, I'm with you. I get it.
All right, so just some thoughts from me. First, my family and I lived in Olympia. We lived in Olympia right up until until 2000. I was working in Chehalis, Lewis County. I was a planning commissioner in the city of Olympia. I ended up getting a job in Redmond, and Laura and I were having a hard time trying to figure out where to live with 2 young kids. And we drove around for about a year, me commuting to Redmond, and in that year trying to find a place to live up here. And what we liked about Redmond was we loved the trail, we loved the parks, and we were having a really hard time finding out where we could afford, because back then, I mean, the houses in Redmond were just out of sight. They were $500,000 to buy, a detached house in Redmond. I get it, they're now 1.5 to 2 million. And we looked around at communities all around the area, and nothing much has changed in our landform. Monroe is still the best place to get, to locate if you want good schools, you want great parks, you want those trail connections. Monroe is a really great place to live. And so, I also recall the story, I don't know how true this is, but I've heard about it from the Historical Society, that we first tried to incorporate using the name Park Place. And the lore goes that, well, the post office wouldn't allow us to do that because it sounded like a street. But the idea of Park Place was, as I understood it, because we had a park or a couple parks here. And so our history here gets back to parks and trails and having places to go and to do things. And so whether it's residents here in Monroe or just outside city limits, or people coming from outside, like my cousin who lives in North Bend coming up here with their family to Lake Ty. I just learned about that 3 months ago. I didn't know that she and her family were coming here on a regular basis. People like our parks. To Councilmember Walker's point, it does affect your property value in a sense that people like to move places where you've got great schools and great parks. And so I also know from a staff perspective, I get tired of hearing about 2008. I wanted to avoid talking about the 2008 violin here today. No, but I appreciate the fact that you asked the question. So it wasn't us talking about woe is us, 2008. Instead, you asked the right question. I appreciate that. There had to be cuts in 2008, 2009 because of the recession that occurred. And we have not been able to get back up to full staff at parks because we've prioritized PD and other things. And we've needed to do that. There's nothing wrong with that. But I do feel that it's important to make certain that we're investing in that maintenance. Otherwise, the costs are going to be higher to repair things. Also, the risk. If you're not maintaining things, somebody could get injured. And you could be paying out a good amount of money for somebody getting injured on a piece of equipment that wasn't being properly maintained. And so a number of reasons I think that it's important to do that. For us here leaving this conversation today, and it's going to build into our next 2 conversations as well, we have a limited amount of time between now and August 6th. Our last council meeting will be July 30th. If the council is interested in putting anything on the ballot for the voters' consideration for the fall, we're going to need some direction here tonight as to whether or not you'd like us to bring this back with some more information so that ultimately you can make a decision not later than July 30th to have this go to the voters, so the voters can then weigh in and make a decision. So I'm understanding that I've heard from Councilmember Fisher, Councilmember Walker. I think I heard from Councilmember Fulcher, affirmative. How do other folks? Councilmember Hanford, affirmative. Scarborough, affirmative. Did I miss anybody? Beaumont, affirmative. Okay. Okay. It was a great speech, though. If you want to reverse, that's fine. Okay. So we will bring this back then. Do you need more information, or do you just want to see the item come back forward for you to vote on sometime not later than July 30th? Just the item. Okay. We'll bring it forward. And the way that then will appear, just for your information with the budget, I will still prepare a budget like I normally do. We will probably use bank capacity for one of those positions. And remember, we're also talking about the community service officer. And we didn't talk about that here, but that's an LTO, or what do we call them here? Limited term? Yeah. So to make that a permanent position, and the position is important because you have that person out there doing lower risk calls that PD then doesn't need to show up to. So you've got somebody out there that can handle lower risk calls as opposed to sending a law enforcement officer out to pick up a deer. I see a picture of a deer that the CSO was picking up. Yes, okay. It was on Facebook, it must have been true. So there's a picture of one of our CSOs and a deer. There's a story. I don't remember the story, but it was a good picture. So send an officer out with a gun. Okay, dinner. Okay, so sorry. We'll strike that from the record. Okay, so anyway, so what I'll do is a budget will be brought forward. It'll include and probably include bank capacity for one of those positions, and then we would have an amendment available so that in the event that the voters vote in favor of this, there would be an amendment to the mayor's proposed budget to add the additional positions for the biennium. Make sense? Any clarification? Except for the deer. Sorry.
I won't say what popped into my head when you said that. I was just going to wrap up, and we kind of hit on it during the discussion, that the reason that we're bringing this tonight is because of the timeline. If we want to get this run this year so that it can be effective for 2025, we would need to have the election in November, which means adopting the resolution, really no later than July 30th. If you wait and run the election in 2025, then the earliest you would be able to, even if it passes, you would not be able to see any of the property taxes until 2026. So that would put everything off another year. And as you know, they're busting at the seams. I mean, I think I'm being a lot more frank tonight because I'm leaving, but they're busting at the seams. So, and then the other thing too is, as you saw just a couple of weeks here, every time we can hone down the numbers more. So this is a very conservative, in my mind, worst case scenario with regards, and even then for the average price of a home in Monroe, you're looking at 20 cents per thousand or $10.42 a month for that average home. So, and what's nice, and I believe it was Councilmember Beaumont who brought it up, you can exempt low-income seniors. So, again, if there's going to be those that may struggle with something like this, that can be exempted. That does push the tax collection onto everybody else. But again, that's going to be a minimal impact. And this is based on today's assessed values. So if assessed values, again, this last year, assessed values kind of stayed the same. If they go up, the amount per thousand goes down, because remember, there's an inverse relationship there. And then the only other thing that I would just kind of point out, and I don't have the specific numbers in front of me, but it is in the budget book. In the 7 years that I've been here, over 7 years I've been here, your rate per thousand on property taxes has dropped from over $1.40 per thousand down to this year, it's 86 cents. So you're really only talking about going back up to just a little over $1 per thousand with regards to your rate for property taxes if this passes. Again, there's a lot to be able to focus in on with any education campaign that would happen between now and the vote. Those are all good points. Keep those in mind.
All right, thank you very much. And I really appreciate the conversation on this. Time right now is 8:32. Why don't we go ahead and take a recess to 8:40? And I'm sorry, it's 8:33. We'll go off the computers. We'll take a recess though until 8:40, so about a 7-minute recess. And then we'll move on to the next item on the agenda. We're in recess until we're now back out of recess. We're moving on to discussion item number 7.4, permitting cannabis in the city of Monroe with Zach Humphrey. Did you see the agenda? It's singular. It's not in the agenda. Who approved the agenda?
This was myself for the agenda bill anyways. Good evening, Mayor and Council. I have a presentation slideshow prepared for our discussion on this issue tonight, and then I think Clerk Wyckoff and I will work to coordinate bringing a couple of maps over onto the screen. The maps we have in the slideshow are just a little too small, I think, and it'd be nice to zoom in on some of those, I think, as you consider this issue. But just, I think, to start off with how we're going to guide the discussion on this issue, just a brief introduction, kind of explaining why this is here. We'll review federal, state, and then our own municipal law and what it has to say regarding cannabis. And then we'll look at other Washington cities. That'll be pretty comprehensive. We'll look at ordinances, both for and against permitting cannabis in jurisdictions. We'll look at just kind of the scope of permitting cannabis in Washington state, which cities do and allow, the number of that. We'll look at the legislative considerations that I think staff believes council should be aware of. This is a land use issue fundamentally. And then we'll look at the tax narrative and just paint the picture of what this looks like for the city of Monroe. The time constraints we'll address, I think it's been kind of hit on the head plenty of times. The ballot issue and the timelines, deadlines we need to meet for the auditor, and then of course the ultimate requested action, just what staff would like to hear from all of you tonight after we're done with this. Next slide. So this issue is really brought before the council kind of inceptively by a company called Origins. They've made public comment to us several times, submitted public comment, provided their own evidence and research to, of course, support advancing our code in a way that would allow them to do business here. And of course, at the May 14th City Council business meeting, motion was made to bring this to this study session. That's why we're talking about this today. I think the ultimate policy consideration for you all is this is a land use issue fundamentally. It'll go through the code amendment and land use process as we address this. So just, I think, keep that in mind. It's comprehensive, and we're going to get into the details of all that comprehension on the next slide. So I think just a brief review of federal law. The Drug Enforcement Administration has asked the White House to reschedule marijuana from a Schedule I to a Schedule III substance under the Controlled Substance Act. That would put it on approximately the same level as testosterone, and I'm forgetting the other substances that it would kind of have it equal out to. I think something to point out, though, it is still illegal at the federal level. Reclassification would not legalize the state-regulated recreational cannabis industries or any of the actions that states have taken independently, which I think is ultimately where the friction is that we're feeling on this issue nationally, is that difference between state and federal authority. Washington state law, of course, we're all aware, Initiative 502 passed in 2012 and really directed how cannabis was going to be regulated at the state level, of course, establishing the Liquor and Cannabis Regulating Board, and they provide oversight for all things cannabis related, whether that's processing at an industrial level, producing, packaging, retail establishments, as well as medical cannabis cooperatives, all run through the Washington State Liquor and Cannabis Board. And of course, Monroe Municipal Code is important to mention here. I think just to mention in 22.56, the code states that the purpose of the chapter is to promote community and public health, safety, and welfare by excluding marijuana-related uses from within the boundaries of the city of Monroe. And just so you know, Monroe Municipal Code 22.56 respectively prohibits the cultivation, production, processing, and sale of cannabis, whether for medical or recreational purposes, in all zoning districts of Monroe, prohibits cannabis cooperatives across all zoning districts, including commercial, industrial, mixed-use, open space, public facility, and residential districts, and prohibits cannabis processors and producers and retailers in the same comprehensive list of zoning districts as cooperatives. So we have an all-out prohibition on all kinds of cannabis here in the city of Monroe, just so the council's aware. Next slide. And then we have, of course, Washington cities. As I was conducting some of this research, it was interesting just to take a look at what MRSC had to say, and some of the data that they've gathered over time. The map I used to collect some of this information, you can actually visit, and I put the hyperlink. I don't think it's actually linked in the slide, but MRSC has a great article that just objectively reviews sort of the issue of cannabis regulation in Washington state for cities, and also provides, I think at this point is a pretty old list of cities, but we can see that 108 cities total in the state of Washington permit cannabis. It's pretty diverse how they permit it. We'll get into the details a little bit in a later slide and look at the ordinance matrix. It's also provided in your packet. 81 cities, big and small, really across a diverse range of population sizes, still prohibit cannabis under their code and regulate that through land use. And then 39 cities, interestingly enough, haven't addressed the issue or taken any action on it at all. Just, I think, a good point to know as we consider all this. Next slide. So next thing I wanted to just bring to your attention are some cannabis dispensaries. This isn't a comprehensive list by any means. I just looking at Google Maps, and there are, I think hundreds might be an understatement, probably not thousands, but it certainly felt like it while I was looking. Lots of cannabis dispensaries in Washington state, many of those in unincorporated counties, territory, and lots residing within Washington cities. A couple of note, Lake Stevens has a cannabis dispensary. Gold Bar, they used to have 2 cannabis dispensaries. They only have 1 now, one moved away. Edmonds, Mukilteo, Kenmore, Kirkland has a number of them. Everett has 14 locations. Bothell has one. Issaquah. Tried to pull out cities that are approximately our size, also within our county, just to kind of frame this issue for the city council tonight. Next slide, thank you. And before we, I think, kind of dive into the comprehensive ordinance matrix that I kind of put together for you all, just kind of wanted to go over each of the legislative actions that the council could consider tonight. Washington state requires, I suppose at a maximum, that cannabis dispensaries are outside 1,000-foot buffer zones from a number of places. And I'll read off some of those to you today. So it's RCW 69.50.331 requires licensed cannabis producers, processors, and retailers to be located at least 1,000 feet from a list of public and child family-centered facilities. And then there's legislative action that can be taken to reduce the buffer zone for certain areas, with the exception of schools, playgrounds, childcare facilities, I believe. Anyways, we'll review the 1,000-foot buffer and 100 and 1,000-foot buffer maps tonight. We did map that out for the council just to show you all what that would look like, and where cannabis dispensaries could potentially theoretically locate someday. Of course, there are permanent zoning ordinances that just permit, of course, the cannabis dispensaries, retail, production, marijuana cooperatives, but that also have some caveats that go a little bit more than, I think, just maintaining that minimum regulation, and they regulate transportation as well as require some other conditions in order for the uses to be compliant with the code. We have conditional use permits that some cities have adopted. We have interim zoning, of course. If the council chose to move forward with this, it would have a legislative tool to use where it could permit cannabis as staff figures out the actual regulation for it if we move forward. And then we have, of course, our moratoriums and prohibitions where there's just an outright prohibition on the sale of cannabis or use of any kind, and some interesting ones in the ordinance matrix that we can go over. Next slide. All right. Yeah, so I don't want to go over, of course, every single ordinance here, and this is by no means every piece of legislation that exists on this issue in Washington state. But I have kind of on the left side there, the categories kind of sort of articulating the type of legislative tool that could be employed. Then of course we have the jurisdiction, the ordinance number in case any of you are interested in reviewing, and then the actual description of that ordinance. And I highlighted a couple just for my own notes just to review with you all tonight. Of course we have ordinances that would reduce the buffer zone to potentially allow for more space in a jurisdiction. City of Shelton reduces the buffer to 500 feet for researchers, processors, and producers, for childcare centers, arcades, libraries, public parks, public transit centers, and recreation facilities. Once again, everything's very diverse, but I think this is just really to show the council that there's a breadth of action that can be taken. There are some ordinances that also allow medical cannabis cooperatives explicitly, but then leave out retail establishments. Tacoma, City of Tacoma, they have cooperatives. They permit cooperatives, but they must be operated as secondary to residential use and not create nuisances like traffic or noise, everything associated with production. You could also regulate smell or something to that effect. Of course, there's prohibitions that, or ordinances that do the exact opposite and prohibit medical cannabis cooperatives. There are ordinances that allow cannabis businesses in certain zoning districts. I think the City of Vancouver is a good example. They prohibit cannabis businesses at home as home occupations, outdoors, or in mobile structures. There's regulation that can be taken there to specifically address maybe a particular concern related to permitting cannabis in the city. There's limiting the number of retail cannabis businesses allowed. The Liquor Cannabis Board assigns licenses to jurisdictions, but councils can take action to limit the number of active licenses within. So in our case, the City of Monroe has 2. The City Council could choose to only allow for 1. It's an action that's possible. Of course, there's permitting cannabis as a conditional use. Or with other associated development standards. There's really only one city in Washington that did this explicitly, and there were quite a few that essentially do this, while maybe not naming it as a conditional use. Newport requires retailers, production, and process centers to, set up their facilities in a way that deters crime or such things. So you could permit it as a conditional use there. City of Issaquah has specific use standards laid out for recreational cannabis facilities. For example, they require all production, processing, or delivery of cannabis to not be visible in the public. It requires cannabis businesses to be located 500 feet away from one another. It requires a security system, crime prevention, just through interior design. So there's some interesting mechanisms that you could take advantage of. Of course, then there's also addressing cannabis transportation and then prohibiting cannabis business outright. So a lot to consider. And then, sorry, Jody, I think I forgot to mention, you already got it, wonderful. But anyways, this is a pretty thorough, I think, list of actions that could be taken. And I think really expresses the diversity of legislation that exists on this issue. Just kind of going back to an earlier slide, you saw that 108 cities permit cannabis in their jurisdiction, but many of those do it in very different ways in order to attract a certain kind of business to their jurisdiction and to deter other kind of business while still permitting the act. Next slide. And then moving on to just the zoning and legislative considerations around this issue. Of course, I mentioned the RCWs that require licensed cannabis producers, processors, and retailers to be located at least 1,000 feet from a variety of public and child family centered facilities and places. And then RCW, the same RCW, but just Section B allows local governments to reduce the 1,000-foot buffer to 100 feet by ordinance, except for elementary schools, secondary schools, and public playgrounds. And the next slide. So before we jump into the actual maps, I just wanted to kind of explain how these maps were developed by city engineering, and a shout out to Celine Newman. I told Celine I would do that. Celine helped me very much in preparing these maps and spent a lot of time on this for me. So City engineering staff developed 2 maps to show where retail cannabis stores could theoretically be located. The map designers, Celine, defined playgrounds as a developed parcel where play equipment dominated the site or where the site is primarily dedicated to play equipment. The map designers defined a park as a parcel or site with features in addition to play equipment, trails, open areas, workout sites, etc. I say all of that just to point out that those were the parameters. That's how we produced this map. Those could be subject to change, but the product that you have before you was created using those standards, just so the council is aware. Again, this was kind of built sort of on the dime, but there was a procedure in place, and just wanted to articulate how that was all developed. So starting out with the 1,000-foot buffer map, and Jody, we'll go to the map in a little bit, but I just kind of wanted to discuss some of the observations that staff members made. The 1,000-foot buffer map identifies 141 parcels that did not have a common boundary with abutting and outer boundaries of any of the 1,000-foot boundaries. So all that to say, there were a number of 1,000-foot buffer zones created in this first map. 141 parcels are available. Of the 141 non-abutting parcels, 24 parcels were identified where cannabis producers, processors, and retailers could potentially locate if permitted. There were 5 general commercials, pink parcels, and then 19 light industrial or dark gray parcels. The other 117 identified parcels from this map were single family, multifamily, and limited open space zones. And Jody will go over to that first map. And then 2 parcels were identified that were vacant and undeveloped. So in that light pink general commercial sort of cluster of parcels down there at the very bottom of the sort of, I guess, lower left-hand corner, the very top parcel, and there's a slide that has an arrow pointing to this in the other one, identified is it's right next to, it's on Main Street, and it's vacant at the moment and undeveloped. But just wanted to distinguish that for you all. And then the other parcel that staff identified was in the light industrial commercial zone. It's currently a vacant parcel adjacent to the Canyon Creek property. There on, I put the, no, not on Frylands Boulevard. Jody, I think we'll just go to the slide that has the two arrows pointing to them. That way I don't have to embarrass myself trying to describe things. This slide in the slideshow. The slideshow, yeah, thank you. There we go. Yeah, so there are 2 arrows pointing to both of those vacant and undeveloped parcels. And then, of course, all of the parcels not touching the buffer zones are colored according to their zone. So I think we'll move on to the next map the staff developed. This is the 100 and 1,000-foot buffer map, where the 1,000-foot buffers are kept around schools, those elementary, secondary, high schools, and also playgrounds. Of the 251 non-abutting parcels that staff members identified in this map, 64 parcels were in general commercial, light industrial, tourist commercial, and downtown commercial. And then, interestingly enough, no other undeveloped or vacant parcels were identified in this map. The other 187 identified parcels from the map were single family, multifamily, limited open space, parks, and medical zones. And then we'll just go to the next slide. Again, you can kind of notice a lot more space is opened up. Once again, those 2 arrows pointing to the vacant and undeveloped parcels. Staff did check to see if any of the revealed parcels in this map were vacant, particularly in the downtown area, where there seemed to maybe be some potential opportunity, and nothing was identified. But those are all parcels where cannabis stores of one kind or another could potentially locate if the council moved on this.
Councilmember Walker, did you have an item for clarification?
Yeah, with this map, it's a combination of 100 and 1,000 foot buffers. So those larger swaths, those larger pink swaths are parks, and then the schools, of course, kind of down there. If you go south, you have the high school, Park Place, Frank Wagner. You see the Frylands, of course. I think a couple of others, but yeah, this is a combination of 100 and 1,000 foot buffers, and we couldn't find a way to, I suppose, distinguish which 1,000, which of those blue circles were 1,000 and which of those were 100, but it reveals more space.
That answers the question. The blue's the buffer. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Go ahead.
And I think we'll just move on to the next slide then. And then there are just some, I think, interesting legislative considerations. Of course, cannabis is something the Washington State Legislature continues to address on a regular basis. House Bill 1650 came to our lobbyists' attention in 2024. It did not pass, but it would have required cities to hold a public vote if they wish to maintain a ban on cannabis. It didn't pass. Additionally, it deprives cities of the benefit of collecting a share of the state cannabis excise tax revenue of cannabis if a city or jurisdiction permitted cannabis. I believe it was after 4 years of the passage of the legislation. So kind of an interesting incentive. It is likely that a bill similar to this, we were assured by our government affairs folks, is likely that a bill similar to this will probably come back to the state legislature in the 2025 legislative cycle. We have House Bill 2320, which requires cannabis retailers to post warning signs on their products that possess any high potency cannabis in their product. And of course, you have Senate Bill 6271, which offered to restructure the existing 37% cannabis tax to be on a sliding scale depending on the volume of high potency cannabis in a particular product. So you could tax a high potency cannabis product more than maybe a low potency cannabis product. I suppose vice versa as well. And once again, likely all of this is to come back to the state legislature in 2025. So just wanted to make council aware of that.
Okay, pause for a second. Councilmember Scarborough, did you have an item for clarification?
Yes. So the one that did not pass, 1650. Basically, does that say that right now it's up to the city councils to determine it? And if that passes, it'll be up to a vote of the people?
Yes, if a piece of legislation like House Bill 1650 were to come back to the legislature and pass, then it would require cities to go to a vote of the people if they wanted to continue and maintain their moratorium on cannabis. And I think I'll just quote specifically from the House Bill itself. 50% of revenues would go to support substance abuse disorder prevention treatment services. And the other 50% would be used for cannabis research. If cities, towns, and or counties on the effective date of the legislation have a ban or moratorium on the operation or siting of cannabis retailers and have no cannabis retailers operating in their jurisdiction, that after the effective date of the section then authorize retail cannabis within their city. So the incentive, or I suppose the legislative tool they're trying to use is have jurisdictions permit cannabis sooner so you can take advantage of the tax revenue benefits, as opposed to having this piece of legislation pass, your jurisdiction still has a prohibition or moratorium on cannabis. And if another council, or if that council were to permit it later, then you would forfeit all cannabis revenues.
Let's go on to the next slide.
And then just some other legislative consideration. You have the advisory vote, and those are the variety of due dates that we'd have to meet for the county auditor if we wanted to do an advisory vote on this particular thing. Of course, we're looking to get this on the November 5th ballot, so the due date would be before August 6th.
And as we discussed in the last go round, it would be July 30th if the council wanted to do an advisory vote. Right. Good. Thanks.
Yep, just the tax narrative, just paint it for you. 37% cannabis excise tax collected by the state, 1.5% of the state excise tax revenues. So of that 37% distributed to jurisdictions based on proportion of total cannabis tax revenues. And then there's a 3.5% per capita share of that tax that's distributed to all counties and jurisdictions, regardless of whether they have retail cannabis establishments in their city or not. Local jurisdictions who don't have any or have a prohibition on cannabis wouldn't be able to take advantage of that 3.5% per capita share. I'll go to the next slide. And then I think just to give an example of where potentially the city of Monroe could be sitting, we used some figures from a Como News report to try and kind of guesstimate where maybe the city of Monroe could take advantage of some of that tax revenue. We came up with a $50,000 figure. I think just important for council members to remember that this was used based on the information from the Como article, strictly on the per capita distribution. So we're not entirely sure what it would look like if you had per capita and the retail tax put together, but we're probably somewhere in that $50,000 price range for generated revenue for the city. And then again, just time constraints, addressing the advisory vote and some of the timelines we need to meet for the auditor. I'll go to the next slide, Jody, thank you. And then just looking at the code amendment process, something that council members are very aware of, so I won't digress here. But just articulating that in the council packet tonight, in case any of you were interested, just what this process would look like for city staff. We're looking at potentially a code amendment taking anywhere from 6 to 12 months, depending on how many public hearings we have. And then, of course, just looking at community development's work plan. List on this slide is just a list of all the state mandated deliverables that we have to meet. Of course, there are a number of other things that community development is working on, but just wanted to make council aware of that this project would inevitably land in the Planning Commission's lap at some point, and also staff's lap, just working around some of the other projects that we have going on right now. And then Title 22, that cleanup of our unified development regulations is probably where this particular project, if council wished to pursue a code amendment to marijuana, would fit in. So there are 3 phases identified on this slide. We have phase 1, just correcting Scrivener's errors. We have phase 2, updating the land use tables and restating development standards. And we have phase 3, where it's just improving the code usability and other additional revisions. And staff is recommending, based on the scope of work, that we would fit this particular project into phase 3. And then just the requested action is how would you direct staff to pursue this issue is ultimately what staff is looking for this evening.
All right, Councilmember Fisher, go ahead.
Hey, Zach. Hey, can you go over the 50% funds for how that is allocated out one more time? I tried to find it in here. I found it initially, but I couldn't find it again.
Yeah, of course. So if House Bill 1650 had passed, it would have set up sort of process and really given cities or jurisdictions sort of a timeline to permit cannabis in their jurisdictions. And after the passage of that particular piece of legislation, if jurisdictions still had prohibitions on cannabis and then they permitted it later, cities and counties would not be able to take advantage of the 37%, of the 1.5 and 3.5% tax benefits that would come from this cannabis tax specifically. So the 50% breakout is going to support substance abuse disorder prevention treatment. And then the other 50% would be used for cannabis research at the state level or contracted with universities or something to that effect. But it would all be subsumed by the state.
Okay, so that's the funding, the 37% minus the 1.5 and the 3.5 that the state's collecting that goes to.
Yep, if 1650 had passed, which it did not.
And
So-
there is nothing now where that just goes into the general fund of the state right now, correct?
Yep, 37%, I guess, minus 1.5 and 3.5 goes into the state's general fund, and they use it how they see fit.
Thank you. These microphones are gonna be the death of me. I swear.
I know, we need the clap on, clap off ones. Beaumont, Councilmember Beaumont.
You can call me Beaumont. Thank you, Mayor. Quick question, and I read this and I heard you just say it. I'm just clarifying that the bulk of this staff work would fall under community planning department.
Correct.
So they've got comp plan this year.
Yep.
They've got their plates very full. And also, again, reading carefully all of this that you presented to us, which was really great. Thank you. Very well done. I read for a code change, you've got a phase 1, a phase 2, phase 3. It looked to me that a phase 2 was 9 to 18 months.
For the code change process, yes, yeah,
Okay.
that would be correct.
And then phase 3, I read, was that an additional 9 to 18 months, or was the 2 and 3 the same?
Pardon, could we clarify? Are you
Yes.
looking at the UDR updates or the code
This is on
amendment
page
process?
8. Yes.
All right, perfect. Yeah, so the Title 22 Unified Development Regulations update is just one of those projects that community development currently has on their work plan, looking at all of the various chapters in Title 22. It's broken up into 3 phases. This doesn't specifically address the code amendment process specifically, but rather is just kind of showing you how the Unified Development Regulations or Title 22, how that project will be broken up. And so that first phase is to correct any scrivener's errors and any attorney's corrections throughout all of Title 22. And that'll be its own kind of separate project that'll be complete hopefully by the end or the end of Q1 of 2025. Then phase 2, which will take probably 9 to 18 months, isn't scheduled specifically for which date, but I'd assume that it would start shortly after Q1 of 2025. Phase 2, updating the land use tables and the development standards, that particular component will take approximately 9 to 18 months. And we arrive at phase 3, where we're improving just the code's usability, any other revisions, looking at issues like this would fit well into the scope of work for phase 3 of the UDR updates. And then at that point, we would go through the code amendment process for this and potentially other code amendments that the city council wanted to make.
So just to pull that up to big picture, what I wanted to make certain was that the council was aware and the public was aware that if the council were to decide just magically today, you just wanted to make it legal to have cannabis here in Monroe, or if you took it to a vote of the people and they voted in favor of it, that it could be a year or 2 years before the council were to act. And so that is the intent. I know there's a lot of detail here, but it's not like flipping a switch where you say that it's legal and all of a sudden a store comes in for a building permit. There's still zoning and all this other stuff that we need to go through. The purpose of showing all the work program is just, for your understanding, you can still work in just like any other zoning proposal. It's just that we have a limited amount of staff and we would just need to figure out what, where it fits into the program if the council decided that they wanted to go that way. And then the reason for the maps, again, it's so that you have an understanding that making it allowed in Monroe, even after you adopt a zoning code, doesn't mean that it's going to be right next door to your house or right next door to, an elementary school or something like that. It's just intended to help out with that understanding. So I just wanted to pull that up since we got into high detail. And then we also wanted to make certain you understood that there are all sorts of different ways to handle it in terms of conditional uses versus permitted outright and things like that. So with all that said, there's a whole series of decisions that end up getting made over several months or a couple years before you would have legal spaces where something like this could go in Monroe. Okay, Councilmember, you still have the floor though.
So just to clarify, let's say we did decide to move forward on this, this would or would not affect Community Planning Department this year while they're working to get the comp plan done.
The city council would need to probably look at the existing work plan and determine what takes priority on that work plan.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. Other questions or comments? Councilmember Fulcher, go ahead. You almost became Councilmember Feather because I was taking Fulcher and Heather and putting it together in my
Wouldn't be the
head.
first, sir.
Feather.
Looking at the maps, let's say on page 12 on our presentation. Thank you, by the way. I really appreciate everything being put together. That's a lot of information to put all together. There is those two different places that if we kept it at 1,000 feet and the 100 feet, there are two places that are possibles. One of them isn't possible really, because if we are going by the RCW of a public place that is child and family centered facility and places, there's a church directly east right there. It's a family and child centered place if I ever heard one. And the other one is owned by a public utility, which is our fire department. So I don't really see that happening either. So as far as I'm looking at this, this seems to be kind of a dead horse and it's not going to drink. That's my first comment. I'm sure I'll have another.
And Mayor, may I clarify something real quick? I apologize for the brevity that may have deceived you on this slideshow, but I'll just list, I think, specifically what the RCW requires 1,000-foot buffers to be around. This was in the agenda bill, but I articulated it verbally as well. Elementary or secondary schools, playgrounds, recreation centers or facilities, childcare centers, public parks, public transit centers, libraries or game arcades where admissions not restricted to persons age 21 or older. Those are all of the, that's the list of items stipulated in the RCW. So churches, and I apologize, Councilmember Fulcher, if the slideshow made you believe that we could interpret family-centered facilities to include religious venues as well. RCW doesn't make that exception, which is why it's not excluded, or why there's not a buffer zone from the map, so.
If anyone asks me, I will still point out there's a church right there. So just for the record.
Thank you. Okay, just looking at council, again, if the council wanted to proceed, you have a couple things right now. One, if there's more information that you'd like, we can bring back more information. Two, if the council wanted to take this to a vote of the public so that you could hear from the public, we could do that, and you already have a sense as to what that timeline would be like. And three, if you didn't want to discuss this any further, that would be another option. So, Councilmember Hanford, your flag went up.
Thank you, Mayor. Thank you for the presentation. So back in 2012, when this came about, Councilmember Gamble and I were the ones here on council, and I toured cannabis farms and retailers in Snohomish County with, I believe it was with possibly Economic Alliance of Snohomish County, put together like a bus tour. And so I got on the bus with several other council members from around the county, and we rode around and toured those. And so that was good to see. The council chambers was during that time was packed as it came about to where the city had to make a decision, and we had several people in the chambers for a few weeks in a row. Some in favor of cannabis, and most not in favor of cannabis. And so we put this ban in place. And then just to kind of skip ahead, so we haven't heard anything for years. That was 12 years ago. And then we've been receiving the emails from Yana and Sean Miller from Origins Cannabis. And they have been very kind and professional and reached out to us to tour their facilities. I took them up on that. Sean gave me a tour of his facility in Redmond, and it was very clean, very secure, respectable business. I was very impressed compared to the previous tours that I had done a decade ago. It was very well run. That being said, in the last year or so, I could be wrong, but we've had roughly 2 to 3 emails in support of cannabis. And we've had about a couple people come to council in support of that. But it's definitely different than it was 12 years ago, where Chambers was full of people. And so while I value those emails, it's not the same where we have an army of our citizens here in Monroe coming out to speak in favor or against it. And so while I appreciate bringing up all this information, we can talk about tax revenue being minimal, about 50,000 a year, like was presented earlier. We can talk about whether or not we agree with marijuana. But regardless, it kind of goes back to what Councilmember Campbell mentioned a few weeks ago. And this was one of the reasons that I had said 12 years ago that I could not vote in favor of having cannabis in our city. And that is when we stand up and we take the oath of office and it's administered to us by the mayor or a judge or the clerk, we raise our right hand and we swear to uphold the Constitution of the United States and its laws. And so when we look at the Constitution, Article 6, Clause 2, this Constitution and the laws of the United States, which shall be made in pursuance thereof, and all treaties made, or which shall be made under the authority of the United States, shall be the supreme law of the land, and the judges in every state shall be bound thereby. And it goes on, but regardless of if it's $1 million a month in tax revenue, when we stand up and say we're going to uphold the Constitution and the laws, to me, it's not even an option. And so while I appreciate the presentation and all the information, it's good to know because it may become legal. And I'm not talking about where they're talking about making it instead of a felony, a misdemeanor, or the severity of the law, regardless, like was presented, it will still be illegal. So as long as it's illegal federally, in my mind, we can't sit up here in good conscience and say, well, but the money. So no matter what, as long as it's illegal, I'm of the opinion that we can't do that.
So, thank you.
Thanks.
Councilmember Scarborough?
I don't need to say it. The other thing is, and you two back there each time you've come to us, you've said people shouldn't have to go 30 miles to get their marijuana. So I went out and I drove out to the old Roosevelt store out here, which sells marijuana, and it's out in the county. It's 4.1 miles to downtown. So I don't understand where Monroe is sliding anybody the opportunity to only go 4.1 miles to get what they need. So I don't understand that argument. And I'm in the same pot as Jason and Kevin. And I'm afraid I won't be voting for it to go on. I'm not afraid. I'm not. Thank you.
Any other comments or questions from, go ahead, Councilmember Fisher?
All right, so this subject has been on my mind a lot, along with the next one that's coming up too. It's been, my mind's been very busy. I absolutely 100% appreciate your guys' time that you've taken with us. I feel the same way as they do until this is federally cleaned up. I don't feel like this is something that we want to change or that I want to change at this point. I think the real fight for you guys is at the state and the federal level, and not with us to get this stuff changed. I just did a quick search. We've talked about crimes, all of those things. 140 instances of shops being smashed into with a stolen car or robbed at gunpoint last year. There's 471 shops in our state, and 140 of them were smashed into. So you have about a 30% chance of being smashed into and robbed. That's not something that I really want for our community. And without having the feds behind this, there's no protection for you guys either. There's no protection with cash stuff. I mean, we can go down a rabbit hole of our police officers not being able to chase people that steal cars. We can go down a lot of rabbit holes. But I think at this point in time for our community that this would not be a good choice for us.
Thank you. Councilmember Walker?
Going on. It has been a really tough, I want to say, weekend looking into this stuff. And last few weeks, I wish this job was full-time, because my wife definitely tells me that I'm doing it full-time. And that might just be because I like reading this stuff. I don't know, but this one, I first wanted to start with kind of all the ideas or things or arguments that you feel or you hear most often around it about dispensaries. And frequently it's you're putting this into the community, our kids are having more access to it if you do that. And so I was looking at a lot of resources from the MSRC were great, and I wish I had shared them with some of you beforehand. It's not for or against this issue, but just fascinating information about trends ever since. If I can pull it up. Well, I don't know if I'm going to find it, but it was fascinating to me because here we go. Access to students. This measure includes by convention those answering sort of hard, sort of easy, very easy to the question. This is to students in schools. If you wanted to get some marijuana, how easy would it be to get some? In 2006, for 12th graders, it was about 80% said it'd be easy to get some. 66% of 10th graders said it'd be easy to get some. 40% said of 8th graders said it'd be easy to get some. Anyways, I could go on, but from then or from there, everything is down about 20%. So that made me think that it is getting tougher. I looked at statistics from the Liquor and Cannabis Board, who is the regulatory body for dispensaries, and also found some pretty crazy figures like cannabis has like a 95 to 100% compliance rate, while alcohol and liquor stores have like a 70 to 75% compliance rate. Cannabis already provides twice as much tax revenue to the state than alcohol does. And the state's done a really good job prioritizing those tax dollars to education, public safety. Anyways, primarily good things. I was just really impressed by those numbers. And I think that the Department of Revenue has done a really good job distributing that. When the map was pulled up of where a dispensary could go in the city, it actually made me think to someone who doesn't want dispensaries in the city, but at the same time wouldn't mind getting some of the revenue from it. It'd almost be preferable for that person if you thought, well, they would have to buy one of these 2 parcels of land to get a dispensary in our city. The city would be enjoying the tax benefits of one of those columns
whether or not there's an actual facility in the city or not. So that was interesting to me. I think that I have heard a lot of residents say basically why is the city not taking this up and at least discussing it? Seems like a personal decision by the council. Obviously, I wasn't on the council for the last few years when I heard that, so I couldn't really speak to it. But now when I think about this issue, I think we should, I don't know, in my mind, it should be up to the citizens or not a final, we don't even have to go as far as to say the vote can determine whether or not we allow dispensaries. To me, an advisory vote would help us a lot in determining where are we now, because the precincts of Monroe and the city limits voted 53% for the initiative in 2012. At that time, I want to say I just saw that national support for the legalization of marijuana was at like 35%. Now it's above 70%. So I'm very curious because, again, as representative government, if we find out that 70% of our city thinks that we should, I would personally feel a responsibility to really consider that. Something like this, as Zach mentioned, obviously, or also wouldn't likely go into effect, even if we made the decision today, it would probably take 2 to 3 years. I would love to see an advisory vote on it because to me, quashing this idea right now without getting that feedback leaves us in a position of, I don't know. I would love to hear what the citizens think on this issue. And I think that I apologize that it seems that I'm in the minority here. Just looking, American citizens 18 to 30 favor legalization by above 70%. My generation has a kind of softening view on it because it seems like it is a much safer alternative to alcohol. No one goes and takes an edible and gets in a bar fight and kills someone. Usually they go home and watch a movie, and yet alcohol is on every corner in most cities. So I just think from a personal liberty point of view, a freedoms point of view, I want to leave the decision up to our citizens, at least to give us guidance on how they feel about it.
Thank you.
That's all I got.
All right, thank you. Councilmember Beaumont, you were next.
Thank you. Okay, I think this issue has been, some of us have just been wrestling with this mightily, and I'm one of those people that have just really been giving this a lot of thought. I do appreciate the thoughtful presentations. This is a hard one for me because I really appreciate the discussion. I really, really do. Everything that has been said, I support. Councilmember Walker, please don't apologize for being in the minority. That's why you're up here. That's why you were elected, to have a point of view that we don't have. And your age is a big asset to this council. So thank you. I have 4 words. I am a coach. Boy, as much as we'd like to think that we can allow this in a city and adults are buying, adding retail income to the city, as a coach for 12 years, as a sub, I am around school kids. I know what goes on in schools. And the idea that this may be more available within Monroe somehow to my athletes, my students that I care so much about, really, really bothers me. It's a gut check thing for me. What's my gut telling me? And I have been wrestling with this. It's a real tough decision because I agree with Councilmember Walker in that we may have people in the community that would like this, and it would be nice to know in the last, 10 years at least, what's changed and what hasn't changed. But I feel like there's a great deal of movement on the state and federal level around this issue. And until that's cleaned up, as someone earlier said, I think it was either Walker, no, I think it was either Councilmember Hanford or Fisher, they were talking about just cleaning this up. There's a lot of, there are parts of this that I think are going to be resolved fairly soon, and I would feel more comfortable making some decisions about this at that point instead of blazing a trail that we may regret. I also think about communities like Snohomish and Woodinville. When you walk around those beautiful cities that are really well-planned and gathering spaces for a lot of us that travel there, they don't have retail cannabis. And I was talking with someone recently, and I've been polling everyone I know about this because it's really bothering me. And I want to be a good leader. I want to represent the citizens of Monroe, but I also have my own feelings about this. And students, kids, it's a tough one. However, what they said to me, and it really stuck with me, is they said, okay, let's look at all the cities that allow retail cannabis. And do you want to be a Snohomish or a Woodinville or be like them in terms of perception and going out to dinner and walking down these lovely streets? Or do you want to, and I'm not going to say the cities, but do you want to sort of model these other cities? And I thought, well, that's a really interesting way to look at it. And it kind of stuck with me. And I'm not saying Monroe needs to be like any other city. We are unique and wonderful in our own right. But it was food for thought. And I would have to say that I do not support this tonight. I do not support moving forward with it. I think we should stay put. Thank you.
Thank you. Councilmember Scarborough.
Well said, thank you. One of the things too, that Jake's looked up some of these things online. I also looked some of the stuff up online, but I also read that marijuana DUIs are right up there with alcohol DUIs. Not, so to say that they're less, well, we tolerate alcohol, why don't we tolerate cannabis? I don't like the alcohol DUIs anymore than I like a DUI for cannabis. So I think it's just noteworthy that they're at least equal problems with DUI under cannabis and alcohol. And again, I think it's all been said for many of my colleagues. I don't dislike what Jake said. I thought it was a younger view, and it's not necessarily wrong. It's okay. And maybe with longer talks, you might change my mind, but like Councilman Beaumont, there's some of me in my age group, if you will, pardon me, that it just, I've seen it. I've seen it in Vietnam. I've seen it in some parts of the military. And I have a hard time with somebody telling me that it's okay. So I'm sorry that I'm not in your camp, but as far as I'm concerned, they can drive to the Roosevelt store 4 miles away and get it, and they're going to do what they're going to do with it. I'm not going to be able to govern that, but that's how I feel. And part of it's my age, and part of it's my experience with it. And I'm sorry about that, but I see a lot of support for that thought process. And if it becomes legal, I don't know if I could vote for it then, based on what I just said about myself. So you can forgive me for that if you like, or you don't have to, but you can thank that one on my age, I guess. But thank you for your very eloquent and persistent presentations here to us.
Councilmember Fulcher.
Well, despite the insinuations earlier, it is okay that we all have an opinion. And it is okay that it is our personal opinion, because guess who put their names on the ballot? Each one of us. And our fellow citizens elected us because they trusted our opinion. So if someone else wants to run on a different thing, every May you get an opportunity to put your name out there. But I have spoken to regular users of marijuana. I have spoken to law enforcement in other parts of our county. And one of the police officers said to me, he said, write this down. The juice isn't worth the squeeze. And I thought, what an odd thing. But I know that often we're told, oh, it's worth this much to the city if we would just open up and have cannabis stores. That dollar value cannot sway me. So it's an issue beyond that for me. And you guys have very eloquently put that. I appreciate that. People may want it, the younger crowd especially, although I know plenty of people in their 50s who are using. It's not unavailable, as we have pointed out. 4.1 miles from my very own home, closer from those of us who live on the edge of town. They can get it easily. And at some point, this will go to a vote of the people. I don't have a problem with that. But I also know that when my kids were younger and I'm the mom in charge of finances, they say we want to go to Disneyland. I say we can't afford it right now. I'm the one who's steering the car. So I'm going to say, no, we don't take this any farther.
Thank you. Anybody else? Okay, go ahead, Councilmember.
I just wanted to say the same thing. Thank you to all of you guys for just so eloquently expressing your views. I just think this is a great opportunity to have a discussion about a topic that I think makes a lot of people feel on edge. And I appreciate that we're able to so civilly have the conversation. I was going to say, on the same token of pretty cities who we might want or not want to be like, Bellevue, Redmond, I think Mercer Island, Issaquah, Sammamish, Kirkland, they all allow it. And I just always go back to the idea of an advisory vote, because to me, something like this, if we're concerned about what we might find out with the advisory vote, then I think that is something that we have a responsibility to try. And I guess I would just want to go on the record as saying that, because I do think that in time it is going to become legal. I would guess that next year, with the legislature likely becoming less moderate, there were a lot of moderates that retired this year. Bills like that one are very likely going to come back, and they're likely going to pass. I assume that they do want a stick to get cities to remove these zoning restrictions. And one point that I forgot to make earlier is that there are, as was on Zach's presentation. Zach, by the way, congratulations on getting into law school. Thank you. Yeah. There are a lot of tools at planning's disposal or community development's disposal, it seems, as well, whether that's conditional use or limiting the licenses, or maybe we go through 2 years of making code for us to vote on to allow this, and we decide at that time, sentiment's changed, it's reversed, and it looks like the federal government is going to start clamping down on states that have it. Those are some of the things, I guess, that kind of diluted the fears associated with it. And then lastly, the federal idea, I understand, and the take that I don't, or that we shouldn't go against the federal law, because I love the Constitution. Government was my favorite class. I literally pulled out a book that I had in high school called The Words We Live By, and it's every part of the Constitution, talks about court cases, stories, the context that went into those laws. And
while I understand the necessity of the supremacy clause, there are definitely moments where federal law is not keeping up with sentiment. I think the majority of states now have recreational cannabis legalized, and I think way more than that, something like 35, I could be wrong, states have medicinal cannabis. Those numbers could be wrong. But it feels like the sentiment is ahead of the federal, policy position by far. And I think that it's because a lot of politicians very much at the federal level are very scared of having this conversation, even though we all know that a lot of people support it. And I think that there are times when, thank goodness, the states ignored the federal law at that time. There are moments when it's necessary, and not that this is, yeah. I'll wrap it up. Sorry for talking so much, you guys. I am so grateful for the reasoning behind every one of your comments as well. It makes sense. I understand it, and I love being able to go back and forth with you guys and exchange ideas, because that makes the best policy.
Thank you. Councilmember Fisher.
All right, with all this discussion, one, I don't think marijuana is the great evil. I feel like if saying that I don't want to move forward with this, that I have some kind of misconception about it. That is not what I'm trying to get at. It is truly the reclassification. So, and then just so you guys know, if it does get reclassified to a Schedule 3, it doesn't decriminalize it. So it's still illegal. So then we would have to kind of go down that road. That would definitely help me with my decision with this whole thing. Mr. Walker had said earlier that the state is doing a good job with the funds. I feel differently. When I read it to you guys earlier that you have a 30% chance of your place getting robbed or smashed into by a Kia, a stolen Kia, I don't think that is a good use of state funds. They get plenty of money, 37%, right, is the tax on it, which is 16% higher than the next state, which is Colorado at 21%. So again, I think that your fight is, and I don't want to act like we're fighting. I still really like you guys. I think you're great people. But I think this issue has to go more towards the state than the city of Monroe. And when there are specific things that change, then I would definitely be more likely to move forward with this process, if that makes sense. I just want to kind of clear that up a little bit. Thank you.
Thank you. Council members, I really appreciate the conversation on this topic. When I started off as mayor, all this stuff had just happened. I too, at the time, was interested in the supremacy clause, I guess is what it's called. I've changed over the last 12 years, 10 or 11 years on this. I understand that you take an oath to defend and support the Constitution of the United States. Let's not forget that it also says the Constitution and the laws of the state of Washington. There was an initiative here. The people spoke in this jurisdiction. It was over 50% in favor of legalizing cannabis. To me, this was never about revenue. To me, this is about personal choice, about allowing people the opportunity to make a choice for their own personal lives as to whether or not they want to do something that this state has found is legal. I, for one, would love to hear what the voters have to say. So I do appreciate the fact that this did come forward for conversation. It's my hope that someday in the near future that we'll be able to hear from the voters, or that there will be a way to allow people to make that choice here in our communities. But I do thank you all for the conversation on this topic, and I think that's all I have for now. With all that said, so if there's no further conversation on this, we will not be bringing this back forward. I do have an important question. We have not extended, okay, we're gonna make a hard shift here, so now we can laugh. We have not had to extend beyond 10 for a very long time. I think the last time was when Patsy Cutterback was leaving I was not here that night, so that's not my doing. I'll go with that. So the question here is this: we have room on the agenda next week. If you'd like to, we can talk about the speed zone cameras conversation next week at our council meeting on the 25th. Or we can entertain a motion to extend beyond 10 for a conversation that may take the same amount of time as what we just went through here. So I leave that to council to consider. Do you want to are you prepared to extend beyond 10, or do you want to move this to next week? Councilmember Hanford?
I move to extend our city council meeting until 10:30
Okay,
PM tonight.
all right. I have a motion from Councilmember Hanford to extend tonight's meeting to 10:30 PM and a second from Councilmember Fulcher. All right, any discussion on the motion? Councilmember Scarborough?
I would go the other way. If there's enough room next week. Here our house, where were the group on? I suggest it might be more time, less, I got it here, talk about. I don't know that.
Okay, and I can go either way, and it doesn't really matter what I have to say unless there's a 3-3 vote here. Councilmember Beaumont, you put your flag up? For tonight. Okay, got it. Councilmember Walker, your flag is kind of up?
The last few weeks when I've left here, I've told myself next week I'm not going to talk as much. I'm going to talk 10% as much as I did. I feel terrible. I can only imagine how sore your guys' ears are to my voice. So I'd rather we continue tonight so I can try to abide by that goal of mine next week.
Okay. You know, we talked about meaty topics tonight. It's only 2 or 3 items, but it's meaty topics. It's okay. All right. All right. Yes. So the question was, can staff leave who's not part of the rest of this? And the answer is, yeah. So, yeah, if you're not involved in this, please go ahead and leave.
Sorry.
Okay. No, we haven't voted yet. Thank you. Thank you. Okay. All right, we have a motion on the floor from Hanford, second Fulcher. All in favor of extending to 10:30? Vote yes.
Aye.
Okay, all opposed? Motion passes. All right, we are now extended beyond 10:30, and what did I say?
You said beyond
10. Oh. All right, so until 10:30, and I'm going to go ahead and invite
Let's go, come on.
Liam McCorkle forward.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. McCorkle, this is your first time speaking before the council, and welcome. And there's somebody online watching by the name of Karen.
Oh yeah, she's my mother.
Okay. Hi, Mom.
Yes, I am.
All right, you've got the con.
Great. Well, good evening, council. It is so good to meet you all in person. I know I was introduced last week, but it's so good to be here in person finally. And I just wanted to make an opening statement saying how glad I am to be here. And I really look forward to getting to know each and every one of you and continuing to work with you as we move forward. With that, I have been tasked with preparing an agenda bill and agenda item for you today on speed zone cameras. You can go ahead and go to the next slide. So just to go over the contents of what I will be going over, I'll start off with a little introduction, where this policy comes from, as well as going over a bit into the intent of it, as well as its effectiveness. After that, we'll go into the background, where we see this program existing in the city of Monroe's history. I will then look at, and from there, we will also look into the advisory votes, as well as the infraction reports that were processed in the past. We will then go into some program considerations, and then end it off with some rough fiscal estimates and looking into the fiscal impacts as well. Next slide. All right, so starting off with an introduction. So the revised Code of Washington authorizes cities to use automatic traffic safety cameras in order to detect stoplight, railroad grade crossing violations, speed violations in certain locations, including hospital speed zones, public park speed zones, school speed zones, and school walk zones. Effective earlier this month, June 6th, a new House bill was passed, 2384, which edits a couple of the old regulations regarding the revised Code of Washington. I've incorporated all of that into your agenda bill and infused that into this presentation as well. The Monroe Municipal Code also authorizes currently the use of automatic traffic safety cameras for the purposes of school speed zones, red light violations, as well as railroad crossing violations. And then just an overview of the intent of automated traffic safety cameras. They are originally intended to be used to help reduce the frequency and severity of speeding-related crashes, efficiently maximize public safety improvements, maximize public awareness of speeding, and really at the core of it is emphasizing public safety over any sort of revenue generation. We're looking to the effectiveness of the program. Various observational studies have shown that automated traffic safety cameras can reduce collisions by between 5 to 69%, and all of that helps reduce cause of death and also speeding in certain zones. I've also compiled a list of cities in Washington State that currently use and operate speed enforcement camera programs. I believe there's 17 currently, and then there's 233 across the United States who are currently operating speed enforcement camera programs specifically. Next slide. Alrighty, so going over a brief overview of the background. So in February 2007, the council decided to adopt Monroe Municipal Code 10.14, which authorizes the use of automated traffic safety cameras. Later on, in September 2007, they, after a request for proposals, signed an agreement with Red Flex Traffic Systems, who agreed to install a red light camera at US 2 and Lewis, and also conduct a survey of that location, and then also include a provision to include speed enforcement cameras at a later date. So in May 2010, after numerous complaints from citizens seeing that individuals were speeding in the Frank Wagner and Frylands elementary schools, the city decided to conduct a survey with Red Flex Traffic Systems and look into implementing a photo speed enforcement programs. After evaluating those results, they decided to move forward with it. So from July 2011 to December 2013, the city operated a speed enforcement program in both of those school zones, as well in addition to the red light camera operation. In December 2013, the city decided to stop its contract with Red Flex Traffic Systems, primarily noting the unpopularity of the system. During the duration of the program, and actually starting slightly before, a few organizations in 2011 submitted a proposition for Monroe Initiative Number 1, which sought out to do a couple of things. First of which being to repeal automated traffic safety cameras, the ordinance, impose voting and approval requirements for any future use of traffic cameras in the city, limit the amount of fees for traffic camera infractions, and require an advisory vote on the use of automated traffic safety cameras. In June of 2011, the city declared or passed a resolution that found Monroe Initiative Number 1 to be invalid and directed the city to take no action to include it on the ballot, suggesting that it overseeded local initiative powers. And then they further authorized the mayor to file a declaratory judgment action as to the validity of the proposed initiative. So then in February of 2011, the trial court granted the city's motion for summary judgment with regard to the majority of the initiative. However, it denied the motion with regard to Section 3, which was the part of that initiative which would require an advisory vote on any ordinance that authorizes the use of automated traffic safety cameras. The city appealed this decision, and upon appeals, the Court of Appeals of the State of Washington decided to reverse the trial court's decision with regard to this Section of the proposed initiative number 1. The reason I bring all of this up is because during this entire process, on March 6, 2012, the City Council passed Ordinance 006-2012, which required or stated that any ordinance that authorizes the use of automated traffic safety cameras passed after January 1st, 2007 must be put on the ballot as an advisory vote of the people during the next general election. Additionally to that, the City Council also passed a resolution that declared its intent to repeal this ordinance if the city won in its appeal, which they did. However, since that time, no ordinance has been passed to repeal that original ordinance requiring the advisory vote. So if we decide to move forward with this process, we will either need to include it on an advisory vote or repeal the original ordinance 006-2012. Thank you. Next slide, please. So with that, I just wanted to put this up to your attention of the violation reports that we got during the duration of the program. So from 2011 to 2013, you can see the total instance that the red flex system was able to identify in both the Wagger and Frylands Elementary School zones. And then some of those instances were thrown out because the plate could not be identified and other various reasons, which brings us to the total incidents that were available for prosecution over the course of those years. And that's included in your agenda packet as well. Next slide. Then we come to advisory votes. So in 2011 and 2012, the city used 2 advisory votes, both of which containing very similar language, which just asked voters if the city should continue the program of using automated traffic safety cameras to enforce traffic laws. As you can see the results up there, both in 2011 and 2012, no votes, which implies to not continue the program, won a majority of the percentage. In 2011, that was 67%, and in 2012, that was 70% towards the no's. Next slide, please. All right. Going back a little bit, looking at the program requirements, if the city decides to move forward with re-implementing this program, especially with the new bill that passed or became effective earlier this month, there are a couple of additional requirements. So when looking to place a camera at a specific location, the city must prepare an analysis of the locations within the areas where the city is proposing to implement these automatic traffic safety cameras. And this analysis must include equitability considerations, including aspects such as livability, its impact on education and the environment. And then, of course, it also needs to show a required need for the implementation of these traffic safety cameras, whether that be excessive speeding in the area, excessive collisions, or even an anticipated failure of other mitigating measures that could mitigate the traffic or excessive unsafe traffic. If the city decides to move forward from there and agrees that that location is acceptable, before any camera can be placed, a sign and notice of the camera's location must be placed at least 30 days prior to the activation of the cameras. And then once the cameras are eventually activated, there are recording limitations on what can actually be recorded. So only the license plate and the car itself can be recorded during an infraction, and it can only happen when a violation is occurring. Additionally, the images can't reveal the face of the driver or the passenger, and any cameras installed have to be able to minimize the flash that is imposed on the driver. And with that, it should also be noted that any of the electronic images or other personally identifying data are for the exclusive use of the city employees and cannot be disclosed via a public records request. With that noted, infractions are processed in the same way as parking violations. So what the typical process is the camera contractor will record the incident, send it over to either the police or also now authorized a public work official who will process the infraction. A notice of this infraction needs to be mailed to the register owner of the vehicle within 14 days of the infraction occurring. And then the fines and fees that are set for this cannot exceed $145. Currently in the municipal code, we have it set at $124. Once those, with all of that in mind, there are also reporting requirements that the city would be subject to. So annually, if the city is operating a program, an active program, the city must publish on its website a report detailing the traffic crashes that have occurred where each camera is located and the number of infractions that each camera led to issuing. And then beginning in 2026, this annual report also needs to include the percentage of revenues that were received from fines from automated traffic safety cameras, and also detailing where those funds are being used. So how much of it is being used to operate the cameras and how much of it is being used for other measures as well. Next slide, please. Yeah. Okay. So then kind of closing this off, especially now that we're talking about revenue. So I have posted some very rough estimates up there. Those are to be used for preliminary discussions only. If we decide to move forward with this program, we would definitely want to do more analysis and bring that to your consideration before you make any final decisions. The estimated revenue and camera contract up there is estimated from historical data. And then the court cost is estimated based on conversations with city staff as a 30% increase in the 2023-2024 biannual budget for the municipal court. So with that, we would expect a estimated net revenue of $151,000. But with that said, there are a couple of caveats in terms of revenue considerations. So the city would be subject 4 years after placement of a camera to 25% revenue sharing with the state, which would go into the Cooper Jones transportation safety account. And that number is calculated after we subtract the cost to administer, operate, and maintain all of the cameras. Furthermore, our revenue uses for any revenue that we generate is further restricted to only 2 activities. The first of which being that administration, operation, and maintenance of cameras, including the cost of processing infractions. And then secondly, the rest of the revenue that's not used for that can only be used on traffic safety activities, including mitigation factors and maintenance activities. However, some of that has to be shown to be used in census tracts in the lowest quartile of income and areas that have a higher number than average number of traffic collisions and unsafe traffic incidents. So that's all the restrictions there with the revenue and the fiscal impact. Next slide, please. And with that, the requested action here today is just discussion. I'm happy to answer any and all questions or write them down to do more in depth. And we would just like to see where we should take this topic next.
Okay, so just a couple of items then. First, we're already aware July 30th. So in the event that you want to go to an advisory vote, it would be July 30th that we would need to adopt something, or council would need to. Second, it sounds to me like there's a footnote that says that it should go to a vote of the people. If I'm not mistaken in my interpretation here, a past council can't bind a future council. So if this council did not want to go to an advisory vote, as I'm understanding it, you would be able to just go ahead and amend the ordinance and amend the code and move forward. Some things we could use tonight, if you want us to bring back more information, again, just like the first topic, let us know. And if you just want us to bring back, whatever the ballot thing, technical terms after 10, let me know. If you want to go a different direction, let us know. So, thank you. I'm going to go ahead and start off with Hanford. So I've got Hanford, Scarborough, and Fisher on deck. Go ahead, Councilmember Hanford.
Thank you, Mayor. So, I was, again, Councilmember Gamble and I were the only ones there back when these advisory votes were put on the ballot. And I specifically remember the number increasing, like is shown in your packet, up to 70%. So my question is this: I have not received one email from one citizen saying we want red traffic light cameras. No citizen has talked to me and said, I'm interested in this. Can you look into it? So to me, public spoke loud and clear 12 years ago that they are not in favor of them, period. So I have not, like, I'd love to hear other thoughts, but I am not seeing any reason for us to go down this path when especially the public told us. Like you said, we represent the people, they voted us in, they were loud and clear on their wishes. So I'm not seeing why we should continue down this path. Thanks.
Okay, thank you. Councilmember Scarborough, then Councilmember Fisher.
Thank you. And that was one of my questions was, why did it come to the, how did it get to be in here? And like he said, he hasn't had any communication or somebody saying, take it to the council. Maybe somebody else has got an answer to that. Not that that matters a great deal. And it sounded like you said, what I'm not quite sure I'm clear on, that you said we passed an ordinance, and it sounded like we would have to pass a change to that ordinance to go forward with it. And then you said something about because that was a different council, that's not true?
You can amend the code. All I'm
Okay.
saying is you've got three choices, the two action choices. One is you can go to an advisory vote, which is what the code says. The other one is I've been advised is you can just change the code. So there you go.
And what do the police have to say about what, does this put a burden on somebody in the police department that's gonna have to monitor all of these prosecution possibilities that come from the camera people? I'm asking you.
Well, what other questions you have, and then I'll have.
That's about it.
Okay. Who can answer the question about staff's involvement in processing the infractions? Would that be PD or other? Okay. Deputy Chief, would you happen to have an answer? Can you come forward for the microphone? It's a recording thing.
Apologize, I wasn't prepared to speak to this issue tonight, but I believe the law has changed as to who can review these violations. So that would be yet to be determined as to which staff member would be reviewing them for violations and sending them to the court.
Okay, staff as either a policeman or city staff?
That's my understanding, yes, sir.
If I can add, I think it's either the police department or a public works official is currently authorized to process the infractions.
Thank you.
Anything? Okay. Thank you. Next up is Councilmember Fisher.
Yes. So great. Yeah, we haven't gotten anything as far as emails or people wanting traffic cameras or concerned with them, but we have been getting a lot of complaints about people speeding. So it hasn't been specific to traffic cameras, but we have the ongoing issues with 179th, Main Street, My Road, Highway 2. I am actually in favor of cameras. I do not like Big Brother watching us, but if you go through driver's ed, 50 hours of drive time, 10 hours at night, a written, a practical, and a reminder of what the laws are, and you still cannot abide by them, then we're gonna have to do something about it. And to me, that is traffic cameras. So that's kind of where I stand with this thing.
All right, thank you. Councilmember Fulcher? Oh, I didn't see your flag go up. Councilmember Beaumont and then Councilmember Fulcher.
Thank you. I agree with Councilmember Hanford and just his tenure. It's great to know how these things originated and hear the history. And I agree, this kind of came out of nowhere. I agree with Councilmember Scarborough as well. However, I'm with Fisher on this. We hear a lot about pedestrian safety, a lot about speeding. I think there has been a change within the community, and we've heard from a lot of people about it, that we've got some unsafe streets out there. I mean, we're having to put, speeding collection, sorry, I'm tired, on 154th. It's an issue in town, and I am not opposed to it. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Councilmember Fulcher?
So I can recall a number of emails that we have had that are regarding this, just not with those same words. And like you said, 179th is one of them, and that is a continual one that keeps popping its head up anytime we look in our emails. There he is again. And then, of course, we had the Powell Street people, the whole neighborhood came and said, hey, our street is a raceway. And I agree, because Sam Street is also one. And when they can't get there, they'll go over to Blakely. So thanks to Waze, they've decided that the short route is through my neighborhood. And if you talk to me at any time during my store located on Main Street, and I look up and go, that's not 25. I say that routinely, even when the police chief is there. And we get people going 35, 40 routinely. We do have a speeding problem in this city, and I can hear them go by my house at certain point. You know how when you're listening to something and you're like, that was faster than a highway. Well, let me tell you, there's Harleys that go by on Main Street around 60 miles an hour early on Sunday mornings. I don't know what it is, but there's some kind of race, and I'm the observer. So I think that we should talk about this. I know that the old council can't hold the new council captive. And so I do think we call it whatever we want. But I'm okay with taking away the old ordinance and then just talking about it. You know, we're elected for a reason. Man, I'm getting tired.
Thank you. Councilmember Walker?
Trying to read my statistic off the screen, and I'm feeling so tired too. It's not making sense to me, but yeah. All right. I also want to express my support for this since I don't know if it was since COVID started and the numbers back it. People are just driving so much more maniacally. I think traffic fatalities are up some crazy, yeah. I'm getting used to just saying some crazy amount for the statistics because now I can't even read them. Here we go, over 70% of drivers are speeding in school zones. We had that huge group from Monroe Christian come out. We all know it. Traffic infractions everywhere are down. And I think it's led to a feeling of like in society of you just don't get pulled over as much. I mean, it used to be when I came over the hill on 522, there was always a stater sitting there getting your speed, always. And now it's like 50-50. And off serving, I don't speed at all. But but if I did, I would definitely think a little bit, I think I'm a bit safer in doing that extra 5 to 10 miles over per hour. And in some MSRC, or actually this is on the city of Bothell. Before this meeting, I listened to a city council meeting of Bothell's Police Department giving an update on how their newly deployed traffic program has gone. They were huge supporters of it. They presented the data. It was awesome. The insights you're able to get from the data are also really cool. I think they threw out a statistic like fatalities are 2/3 less frequent if a pedestrian's hit going 20 miles an hour than if they were hit going 30 miles an hour. So it's very weird, but that 10 miles an hour can make a big difference. I went back and looked at the traffic calming studies that were done, the statistics from around town. Those numbers back it up. People are speeding everywhere. In my opinion, the just speed zone cameras, if that's what they're called, in the school zones are a no-brainer. I think they're gonna, if anything, help our police department a lot by not only enforcing traffic law, but also helping reinstill a feeling in people that there is punishment for the extra 5 miles an hour over that you do, but 5 miles over that could be the difference between a pedestrian dying or living. So.
Okay.
Yep.
So here's the thing, we're at 11 minutes. We extended till 10:30. I've got council members Scarborough and Hanford that have put their flags up. One of the things that I just want to make certain is that to the extent that we can, unless you wanted to extend beyond 10:30, to try to get some thoughts on what your interest is in next steps. I'm going to go to Councilmember Scarborough and then Hanford.
Yeah, I'd like to stay, I'm not necessarily against, I'm just stating the facts. I think you're gonna have, I think it's worth a discussion. So I'd be voting to go ahead and have more discussions on it.
Thank you, Councilmember Hanford.
Thank you, Mayor. I appreciate the input, and I would say that I am open to putting this, more discussion and putting on the ballot for an advisory vote again, if that's what the majority is. I still don't think that, I think they spoke loud and clear, but I'm obviously outvoted, and that's fine. But I would like more discussion. I would definitely not be in favor of just repealing the ordinance and doing our own thing after, like I've already said, they spoke loud and clear. So I think, to me, that's the first step, is putting it to an advisory vote. And I think it would be very important when we put that, if we put that to an advisory vote, that the affirmative statement lists all the reasons that we just talked about the traffic and the schools and speeding and all those kinds of things, so that the citizens of Monroe aren't just seeing another thing, oh, they want to do this. So, thank you.
Thank you. Right now, I don't have direction. Councilmember Walker, go ahead.
I would love to see this brought back in another meeting with numbers or something to present on the cost of an advisory vote, vendors out there for these cameras and their average costs, or what other cities might be paying for them, effects on staff time, our ability to limit these cameras to school zones only if we were to word it that way. Just because if I remember correctly, did the cameras at that time do red lights as well?
Yes, they did red lights.
I was just wondering if that was a part of the sentiment, because I think for the speed in school zones, I feel like probably has a lot more support amongst our residents. So yeah, I guess if we're able to just limit it to speeding in school zones.
Okay, so Councilmember Walker, you'd like more information?
Yep.
Okay, the other council members?
More information.
Well, Jake.
Okay, Councilmember Beaumont, you did put your hand up. Did you want to say something further?
I just wanted to say I was in agreement with Jake. You were looking for some direction, and I think we should discuss more.
Okay, perfect. Councilmember Scarborough and then Hanford.
I'd like to hear more too. Remember, we just said school zone, yes, only eliminate one city. So I want to think about that. From what I'm hearing here, there's a whole lot of roads around town that we need a camera on. Our thought is safety.
Okay, who did I say was next? I had
Hanford.
Scarborough. Hanford, go ahead.
So just to reiterate, the cost for being on the advisory ballot is going to be way less if this November. So time is of the essence. So if we're going to bring it back,
that's what
we're
we're
going to
just
need to be
talking
ready to take action next week.
Yeah, so I was just conferring over here, we will not have this information back to you by next week. That's really,
Because the agenda bill's due on Thursday and tomorrow is a holiday. So we won't be able to come back until the next regular business meeting on July 9th. But remember, we've got an extra meeting on July 30th, so you will have a couple of meetings to talk about it.
July 9 and July 30th. It's okay. Yep. July 30 is your deadline, so July 9, we could bring back more information. You'd then have the 16th, the 23rd, and the 30th to provide final direction, and if you wanted it on the ballot, you'd need to vote on it by July 30th without doing a special meeting. Well, without doing an extra special meeting.
An extra special.
Okay, so I saw
It'll be special because it'll be next.
tonight, yeah. Okay, so I don't know where we are in the flags. We heard we wanted more information. July 9th would be the date. Okay, did somebody else have a flag? We've got 6 minutes. Go ahead, Councilmember Fisher.
I'll make it super quick. I'm also in favor of repealing the ordinance and rewriting that, and not going to an advisory vote on it, just to be clear. And also more information maybe on state laws, because there is something in there where we get a camera and you get a camera for every 10,000 of population. And I don't know if that means we get 3 or if we get 2. I don't know if we get 1 and then, well, that was wrong finger.
Sorry, Liam.
Absolutely did not mean to do that.
I hate it when that happens.
I know, so embarrassing. It is late, right? So yeah, just to kind of clarify that a little bit, for me to see how many we could actually get, and that's all I have, sorry.
Advisory vote versus other. Councilmember Scarborough? You like what Kevin said, okay, which is advisory vote. Do the other 3, huh? Okay, all right. It's not like we're voting, I'm just trying to get a sense for scheduling purposes. Okay, so we'll maintain the current schedule, which will be July 9th, and then you've got 3 additional meetings to make a final determination if you want to make it for this November. Okay, all right, anybody else have any flags to go up? Okay, so Mr. McCorkle, thank you very much for the great presentation. Thank you. And is there anything further this evening? Councilmember Scarborough wanted an executive session? Just kidding. All right, unless there's objection, we are adjourned. Great job, everybody.